Crystal. Okay, so I will call to order the City Council successor agency to the Redevelopment Agency Housing Authority regular meeting for February 28th, 2022. Will you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. We'll move on to item 3, changes to the order of the agenda. Do any of my I'll ask City Manager Jeff Maltby, do you have any changes to the order of the agenda tonight?
Nothing from staff this evening, Madam Mayor.
Okay, and council members, I see Council Member Collins, do you have a change to the order of the agenda?
No, Madam Mayor, I do not.
Okay, then we will move on to item 4, council communications and announcements. Council communications and announcements are brief items from members of the City Council regarding upcoming events in the community and correspondence that they have received. They are informational in nature and no action will be taken on these items at this meeting. I'll open it up to my colleagues. I see Council Member Collins, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. These comments are some personal comments that I would like to make and not related to my separate duties. About 10 years ago, we started the process of rebuilding 817 Walnut as a 100% affordable housing project. The city had owned this apartment building for many years, and we had long wanted to do something more with it. As some may know, I have been involved in affordable housing programs for nearly 30 years, going back to my days as a member of the HIP Housing Board. When the opportunity to do this project came around, I could not have been more excited. But I learned that it's really hard for public entities to build affordable housing projects anywhere, and especially in this town and in this county. For years, we looked for a partner to help us build these units. That wasn't easy either. These things are enormously expensive, and that's why they take so long. But Charities Housing finally came along, and we had a partner to help us make this happen. Make no mistake, this is a signature achievement for San Carlos. A huge point of pride for every council member, past and present, who supported it. But it was our knowledgeable and experienced planning staff who worked incredibly hard to make this happen. We may get the credit for this, but they are the ones that put in the long hours over these last 10 years to make it happen. I've talked to many council members in other cities in our county who marvel at how well run our city is, and that we managed to get so much done with less staff per capita than any other city in the county. Which brings me to my comments at our last meeting. I did express some surprise as a member of the public, informed us that these units lacked what many of us consider to be a basic amenity. And I wanted to know why. Now, I'm also a member of the San Mateo County Housing and Community Development Committee. And last week I asked their staff if this was typical of these kinds of units. And the answer was yes. As involved as I have been over the last 3 decades in affordable housing, I didn't know this. But even given that, our staff is working with charities to further accommodate people with special situations. We should not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. But this is not just a good project, it's a great project. So what I'd like to say now to every one of our employees who worked so hard and for so long on 817 Walnut is, thank you. Thank you for your professionalism. And thank you for your quiet, determined, unsung, and underappreciated work to make this project a reality. You are my heroes. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Collins. Do any of my other colleagues wish to make a announcement this evening? Okay, seeing none, I have 2 brief announcements. Today marks 2 years since San Mateo Medical Center reported its first case of COVID-19. And this morning, I joined Congresswoman Jackie Steer, elected officials, including Councilmember Parmer Lohan, and public safety officers to greet the morning shift of healthcare workers at the hospital and to share our appreciation for their tireless service during the pandemic. I'd like to again extend our thanks to all of our healthcare workers, including our mental health care workers who are also working so hard to meet the needs of our community. And the second announcement I have is that I will be giving the State of the City address this Friday at 9 a.m. via Zoom, hosted by Chamber San Mateo County. Vice Mayor Rack will be joining me for the address, and more information can be found at chambersmc.org, and the video will be posted on the city's website following the address. That's it for my announcements. We will now move on to item 5, public comment. Persons wishing to address the City Council on matters not on the posted agenda may do so at this time. Please note that each speaker is limited to 2 minutes, and you can join us by Zoom or call into the number on the screen. Crystal, is there anyone in the waiting room wishing to make public comments at this time?
Yes, we do have 2 hands up at the moment. First is David Tusman, followed by Mark Olbert. David, you should be able to unmute.
Hello, my name is David Tusman, resident of San Carlos. Just 2 quick comments. I don't think I've had the opportunity to thank the council for their work on the downtown lighting. I think it's an amazing improvement, and it's so subtle but impactful. So thanks for that. It's a nice vibe downtown. And also walking past the Walnut Studios also is really exciting to see those units come online. It looks like the construction is done, but I can't tell from the outside, but it's really nice to see the deeply affordable stuff coming online in a great transit-oriented downtown location. So thanks for your work on that.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David. Next up is former council member and Mayor Mark Olbert. You should be able to unmute.
Yeah, I see the big unmute button. Crystal, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor McDowell, Vice Mayor Rack, and the rest of the council. I hope you read Friday's articles in the Daily Post about how nearly $2 million of public money was spent by Silicon Valley Clean Water, our sewage treatment agency, as a result of alleged sexual harassment in the workplace. If you haven't, I strongly urge you to do so. That money was hidden from public view until the Post uncovered it. Silicon Valley Clean Water took advantage of an obscure provision in our laws which allows an agency to not disclose legal settlements reached in closed session under certain circumstances, unless and until some member of the public asks about them. The result is to hide what would otherwise have to be disclosed in open session. You may not be aware that some years ago, the city of San Carlos got its wrist slapped for doing something similar, which is why this council, however much discussion about a lawsuit takes place in closed session, always approves the expenditures in open session. I urge you to demand Silicon Valley Clean Water adopt a similar policy. Besides upholding the principle of transparency, it would have kept them from looking like they'd done something nefarious, which unfortunately today they do. I also urge you to require all the authorities on which you serve to brief newly appointed representatives on outstanding lawsuits. I was not given such background when I replaced Bob Grisilli on Silicon Valley Clean Water's commission. That kept me from making a fully informed decision when a subsequent settlement related to the original matter came before me. I still resent being treated like the proverbial mushroom in that case, and I'm sure you would too if you were in a similar situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Crystal, are there any other members of the public?
No, there are no further hands.
Thank you. Okay, we will move on to the consent calendar now. Do any of my colleagues wish to pull an item from the consent calendar? Vice Mayor Rack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I was just sort of pulling up to find the exact item. Give me 1 second, and I apologize. Had 2 items I need to mention on that, and I was not organized enough here. So if I can, I would like to pull item 6J. And then I would like to excuse myself from voting on 6G, which is the Burton Park batting cages project. So I don't need to pull that. I've checked with the city attorney on that. I just will not be voting on that item.
Okay, perfect. So I think we'll take this in 3 separate stages. First, could we move to approve the consent calendar items that were not? Go ahead, Ron.
Sure. Madam Mayor, I move to approve City Council consent items A through L, excluding J and G.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Any discussion?
Madam Mayor, I think Councilmember Rack intended not to pull G unless Councilmember Dugan wants to do that, but I think he just has to announce that he's not voting on that one so that it can go through the consent calendar because of his locality conflict issue.
Fair enough. Councilmember Dugan, would you like to amend your motion?
Yes, Madam Mayor. I hereby move to approve City Council consent calendar items A through L, excluding J.
Still seconding.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Councilmember Palmer Lohan,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Rack,
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan,
Yes.
Councilmember Collins,
Yes.
and Mayor McDowell.
Yes, except I think Vice Mayor Rack had to
Recuse from.
vote yes, except recusing from G. Is
Yes.
that correct?
Yes, except for G. Thank you.
Noted. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. Vice Mayor Rack, would you like to take your item J now?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to, thank the staff for the moving quickly on this item. I know it's an issue of great interest for me to get the downtown project going, but given sort of the size of this project and the amount of money we're spending on it, I just wanted staff to spend a couple minutes, if they could, walking through the process and how they ended up with this recommended consultant for the project, and understand a little bit more about the timeline, about what the intention is. I know some of it's already in the notes, but I just wanted to hear a little bit more about the process in terms of how we sort of arrived at the recommendation for today.
I understand there's a presentation from staff.
Yes, Madam Mayor, there is.
Thank you, Lisa.
Okay, great. Thank you, Crystal. Good evening, Madam Mayor and City Council members. Lisa Porras, Planning Manager. The item before you is a proposed professional services agreement between the City of San Carlos and RRM Design Group for consulting services to prepare a downtown specific plan. Let me see. Can I get the next slide? Thank you. Staff is recommending the City Council authorize the City Manager to execute a contract with RRM in an amount not to exceed $983,315. A total of $1 million was secured for this project back in June 2021. Developing a plan for San Carlos's downtown originated from the City Council during its strategic retreat about 1 year ago. The fundamental goal is to develop a plan that meets the unique needs of our community, including our business community, now and in the years ahead. The vision is to steer the downtown and nearby El Camino Real and Laurel Street corridors into a dynamic, vibrant, intergenerational, and eclectic mixed-use neighborhood with seamless connectivity to adjacent residential neighborhoods, the East Side Innovation District, and the Caltrain station. Ultimately, the specific plan will guide change in a way that is meaningful and transformational, and that uplifts and inspires multiple generations, not only in the downtown, but throughout the city. The plan will also address major infrastructure, such as sidewalks, trees, parking, and other public amenities like seating and bicycle parking. But the plan will essentially establish the look and feel of the downtown. Next slide, please. The project boundaries are Holly Street to the north and Greenwood Avenue to the south. The eastern boundary is held by El Camino Real, while the western boundaries are framed by Walnut and Laurel Streets. Around the Civic Center, the focus will be limited to the character of the public realm or the streetscape. Next slide. The process to select a firm began with the release of a request for proposals. The city received a total of 7 proposals from different firms. These proposals were then distributed to an interdisciplinary team of professionals throughout City Hall. This included staff from community development, parks, public works, and professional planning staff from Good City Company. These firms were rated as the top 3 and then invited to interview city staff. Following the interviews, RRM Design Group was rated as a top firm by this interdisciplinary team. Following excellent reviews from reference checks, staff is recommending RRM Design Group to serve as a lead consultant for the downtown specific plan project. In selecting a firm, staff focused on previous work experience, especially work experience that was most relevant to the work being requested by our city. In addition, we wanted to see that the firm had experience working for similar sized cities, essentially cities that had similar characteristics to San Carlos and that were a good fit to meet the needs of our community. We also looked for a very strong civic engagement strategy and investigated the methods and techniques that consultants proposed to engage the community. We also wanted to see which firms had experience not just in plan making, but having their plans implemented. Project schedule and cost was also a consideration. And then finally, a significant part of the selection process was the written approach and scope of work, the oral presentation given during the interview process and responses to staff's questions. Next slide. So should RRM be selected, leading the charge would be Jamie Williams, who is here tonight and can provide the council with an overview of RRM's experience in preparing specific plans and other related relevant work. The RRM team would not only include professional planning staff, but their team also includes in-house urban designers, streetscape specialists, civil engineers, and architects. Supporting RRM would include sub-consultants from W-Trans for transportation, the Nadelson Dale Group for economics, GPA Consulting for historic preservation, and Lamfair Gregory to provide CEQA or environmental consulting services. Next slide. The proposed scope of work consists of 5 overarching phases. One of our key first steps is to create a downtown advisory committee. This will involve working with the City Council Downtown Subcommittee to develop the recruitment process and committee composition, which would then be presented to the full council for approval. Thereafter, staff will work with the city clerk to commence the recruitment and application process. City Council would then conduct interviews and make the final committee selection. Another key component of the first phase includes data gathering and information through a series of stakeholder meetings, as well as preparing a robust community engagement strategy and holding the first DTAC meeting and community workshop, opening up the first online survey and conducting focus group meetings. The next phase will evaluate all existing characteristics and conditions within the project area. The third phase will produce 2 concept plan alternatives to be presented to the community for input. Under the fourth phase, a preferred concept plan will be created based on community feedback. This phase will also focus on developing an infrastructure and services plan as its own chapter within the specific plan document. And then finally, a final draft specific plan will be produced for environmental review and adoption. Next slide. So there are 4 big themes for this project, and that includes placemaking, mobility, land use, and then economics. So here we have placemaking, and placemaking is all about the public realm, looking at the public life that naturally wants to occur downtown and creating great public spaces that support a livable environment that people can truly enjoy. Next slide. For mobility, the focus will be on creating a safe, enjoyable, functional, and seamless streetscape that provides access to places that people want to go to, as well as to stop, pause, and enjoy. We will be looking at making sure there is enough room for pedestrians as well as meeting other needs within the public right-of-way. Next slide. Under the theme of land use, we will be looking to confirm appropriate ground floor businesses, establishments, and events that invite and bring people to the downtown. In order to establish what we call a sense of place, we will pay close attention to land uses and design details of shop fronts and the spaces between buildings that foster intimate connections and connectivity. Next slide. And finally, under economics, Through a market study, we will analyze what is really possible to achieve in the downtown. Through community input, we will understand what is needed to make downtown thrive. Through preparation of financial assumptions and projections, we will understand what items are most feasible and can be realized. And finally, we will develop an implementation strategy to make it all happen. Next slide. It is expected that it will take 24 months to bring a plan forward for council adoption. However, we will know what the preferred concept plan is by August 2023. And then following the selection of the preferred plan, the draft specific plan will be further refined through an additional series of public input opportunities, followed by necessary environmental review, and then be prepped for Planning Commission recommendation and City Council adoption approximately 2 years from now. Next slide. So this concludes my presentation. Staff's recommendation is to adopt a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute a contract with RRM Design Group. Next slide. Should the council have any questions, both myself, Al Savay, and Jamie Williams are here tonight to answer those. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, for that presentation. Are there any questions from my colleagues? Vice Mayor Rack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to thank Lisa for the presentation and for staff for the work, and thank you for putting this together on I don't know how much you had done beforehand on short notice at my request. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the thoroughness in terms of putting this through. And I guess my one question is do you, I'm excited, I'm glad that Jamie's on the call right now, and I know we have a full agenda, so I don't want to take up more time, but is there an anticipation of sort of having maybe, you know, assuming this goes through, that the RRM team would be on to present kind of a little bit more detail in the coming weeks or months about kind of their vision, some of the stuff they're working on, their process, for the council to have a chance to meet them directly?
I'm going to defer that question to Al.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. Yes, Council Member Rack, there will be an opportunity. We'll have a kickoff meeting, and they will be working very closely with the Downtown Committee as well. And so, yes, you will get a chance to meet the team, the various members of the team, and you will have plenty of interface with the team through various parts of the project. And they will be doing interviews with each of the council members as well as stakeholders in the community.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that, Al and Lisa. I don't have any further questions, Madam Mayor, and I'm happy to move this item unless others do.
I see Council Member Palmer Lohan has her hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate you bringing it to light, the framework on this and the timeline. With respect to what I noted in the packet, it talked about the various groups that would be, tapped on the shoulder and invited into the discussion. And I know that we'll be doing general public comment and input. I do recall that during our strategic planning meeting or a previous meeting, we talked about the importance of outreach to the senior citizen community, or as we call them in San Carlos, adults, and also families with young children, typically those, that need to use strollers and that type of thing, to try to better understand maybe the mobility access issues that these community members might face as we're imagining that area. So could you comment on that? I didn't see it called out, so that's why I'm asking.
Thank you, Councilmember Lohan. Absolutely. We are in the process already, kind of talking initially with Jamie, who is here tonight and can say a quick hello if the council would like. But we have already begun talking about, the very first step that we need to do, which is really kind of come up with this community engagement strategy and put all stakeholders on the table and figure out, how We're going to reach out to each of the unique needs of our community, including the seniors, including families with young children, including those with certain unique mobility needs, ensuring that the downtown is a place that is accessible for everyone. So part of that community engagement strategy, we will be sharing with our City Council Downtown Subcommittee and informing them along the way. So this is a very transparent process, and we're happy to hear from the council and receive any input and guidance that you may have. If certain folks come to mind, please do share that with staff. But this is something that we already are contemplating at this time. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And I do know, I think we also talked about universal design standards that kind of get at other challenges people may face. Great. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmer-Lohan. I want to thank Vice Mayor Rack for pulling this. I think that this is an important discussion, and I'm looking forward to learning more. I did have a conversation earlier today with the city manager about involving council in the very early stages with the stakeholder interviews. I think it's really important that the five of us kind of share our thoughts with the consultant before things start moving along too far. I think we've all spent a tremendous amount of time working with our small businesses downtown and hearing from the community all of the feedback. So Al, thanks for being willing to incorporate that at the beginning. And I will appreciate the subcommittee's work and also the opportunities to bring it back to the full council. I think this is just a transformative moment for our downtown, and I think we're all looking forward to having some input in the process. So I appreciate that. Lisa, you mentioned that Jamie is here. Would Jamie like to say a few words just for a quick minute before we move on?
Thank you, Jamie. I think you should be able to unmute yourself and turn your camera on.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to work with on this project. We're very excited, and I think our multidisciplinary team is just going to hit the mark on getting things from planning all the way through implementation on this important project. So happy to answer any other questions, but we're really looking forward to it.
Thank you, Jamie. Thanks for being here tonight. I'm scrolling through to see if there's any other hands raised. I don't see any, so at this point, I'll take a motion for item J, please.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve item 6J.
Second.
Any further discussion on this item? Okay, seeing none, Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Okay, Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Palmer-Lohan?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
And Mayor McDowell?
Yes. Okay, thank you, everyone. We will now move on to reports to council. Tonight, we'll be receiving an update from the Center for Age-Friendly Excellence and San Carlos Age-Friendly Task Force on Age-Friendly Community Initiatives. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you so much. And I think Devorah Kataria is also here. Yes, I am. Can you see?
Yes, Devorah? I see Devorah. Welcome, okay. Devorah.
Great. Well, good evening. I am Cynthia Nakayama from the Center for Age-Friendly Excellence, or CAFE, and I am so pleased that Devorah Kataria is here to present along with me. We have very limited time to talk about the accomplishments and next steps, so let's jump right in. First things first. Oh, it's not advancing.
Sure, I'll help you with that.
A huge congratulations to San Carlos on achieving official age-friendly designation from AARP and the World Health Organization. Your application was approved in less than 5 days, which is record time. We are very grateful to the Age-Friendly Task Force, the amazing focus group participants, and the City Council. More on that later. 3 initial age-friendly projects were included in the application to AARP, and Devorah will talk about one of these projects.
Sure. The first project that we're going to share is the Medical Equipment Loan Program, and that is up and running. It's a collaboration between Villages of San Mateo County, CID, Rotaries, the local Rotaries, and now the city of San Carlos. And it's really an easy project in terms of low-hanging fruit. You're taking people's medical equipment that is lying around and collecting it, sanitizing it, and getting it back out. So we've collected over 200 walkers, wheelchairs, and other medical equipment. And now we've sanitized it and stickered it and gotten it out to dozens of local residents who are very happy. So if you're looking for something fun to do, getting to deliver these items is a joy. We have a few different ways that the public can get involved coming up. We're going to be having pop-up equipment days at the Adult Community Center. During the meal pickup, we're going to have a table and pop-up medical equipment at the Volunteer Expo at the Hometown Days. And we're going to have an official launch party June 4th at the Frank Harrington Park downtown.
Thank you. That's such an exciting project. So another of the projects, if you could advance to the next slide, please, is communication and information to expand and improve communication to our older adults to ensure senior-related information is available. This will include expanding resources from Spotlight, as you see here, and all of you are familiar with, as well as the Parks and Recreation brochure. There is also a very long list of efforts that will be made. Next slide, please. And then and I also wanted to make sure that Deborah made you aware of a new and unique idea that has come up recently.
Sure, and that is a must-see TV program. It's called Age Friendly Bay Area, and this is Scott McMullen, one of the founders of Villages of San Mateo County, is now doing a community access TV program aimed for older adults, interviewing the leaders in the community about essential programs and services. So another really great way to help inform the public and learn about great services for older adults.
Thank you. So the third project is related to mobility and getting around in the city. And this is an integration to already existing Safer Streets for All bike and pedestrian plan. There is also already traffic calming in process, but also some elder specific safety issues came up quite often during the focus groups, and these will be thoughtfully discussed and resolved appropriately. There's just not enough time to talk about all of them, but this is all very exciting, and just wanted to go on with where we are now. So as you know, this is a 5-year cycle. And then we're now in phase 2, which is plan creation. This is due 2 years after certification and includes multiple items. This is a work plan and provides a very extensive look at the city's strategy and demonstrates the city's commitment toward increasing age friendliness. The details of what will be accomplished are also included. Next slide, please. As you can see, AARP requires a specific format of 11 items. This is pretty detailed, so I'll only highlight 2 areas. This action plan is an active rather than a static document, so it's fluid, and if there's any revisions, that's just demonstration of progress. Also, there needs a method of measuring and tracking. So this is criteria that's used when you submit the report to AARP at the end of your cycle. Although San Carlos has so much enthusiasm and motivation that it probably won't take them that long. And I know you'll be starting right away. It's all accomplished. The cycle begins again with new goals. Next slide, please.
So we wanted to call out that our current mayor and previous mayor have done a great thing by instituting this subcommittee on the age-friendly action plan to ensure success, that all these goals are carried out and put into action. So yay, San Carlos.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is quite impressive. We're telling everybody about it. So next slide, please. So with community collaboration and involvement, as well as strong leadership commitment at the top with the City Council subcommittee, it is clear that San Carlos is meant to a continual cycle of success. Next slide, please. Congratulations, San Carlos. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Cynthia and Devora. We really appreciate this update and all the great work that's happening. Are there any questions from my colleagues this evening? Okay, seeing none, your presentation was so thorough, and please let us know how we can help. These are all really wonderful projects, and I just can't wait to see them happening in person. So thank you very much, and we appreciate your work on this.
San Carlos has been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Bev. Okay, we'll move on now to item 8, study session. Study session 8A is discuss below market rate ordinance and provide direction to staff regarding possible amendments to Municipal Code Chapter 18.16, Affordable Housing Program. And I see Adam Aronson is here with us tonight. Adam, do you want to kick us off?
Yes. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I am Adam Aronson, the city's Economic Development and Housing Manager. Also with me tonight is Darren Smith from EPS. Darren and his team at EPS have been working very closely with us on this BMR ordinance update work, and he'll also be available for questions at the end. So I first wanted to start by giving an overview of the agenda for this study session tonight and the items we're going to be talking about and seeking your feedback on. So first, we'll start with a waitlist and BMR unit inventory overview to kind of help set the stage for where San Carlos is right now. We'll then move to an overview of our current inclusionary requirements and the recommended changes we're bringing before you for feedback. And then we'll also look at some potential density bonus changes and other ideas, and then as well as some additional BMR ordinance revisions that are a little separate from the inclusionary ordinance, such as reducing the threshold to construct a BMR unit, extending affordability periods, and looking at ways to improve fair access to parking with issues related to unbundled parking. Next slide, please. Okay, so to start with an overview of our affordable housing waitlist. So this is the waitlist that we use in San Carlos whenever there's a vacancy in a BMR unit or a new unit becomes available. This waitlist currently has over 4,500 households. It has been growing exponentially, and 98% of those on the waitlist are at low income or below. In terms of household sizes, 61% of the households are 1 or 2 persons, 18% are 3 persons, and 21% are 4 or more persons. Now, looking at how this compares to our BMR inventory makeup, you'll see on the far left are units based on bedroom sizes. So 20% are studio units, 38% are 1-bedroom units, 25% are 2 bedrooms, and 17 are 3 bedrooms. So in general, the bedroom sizes of our units tend to align with what's on our wait list. However, when we look at the income level restrictions that are on these units, 37% are very low income, 39% are low income, and 24% are moderate income. So compared to our wait list, there is a bit of a greater need at those lower income levels than what we currently have in the city today. And then finally, looking at rental units versus ownership units, 67% of our BMR units are rentals and 33% are ownership units. One caveat I want to make on this table is that 58 number next to the rental units that are expected. These are all units in city-sponsored developments, so it'd be 817 Walnut and the upcoming Cherry Street project. So we're not currently expecting any market rate rental developments. Next slide, please. So looking at our existing requirements, On the ownership side, we currently require that 10% of units be moderate income and 5% be low income. On the rental side, we require that 10% be very low income and 5% low income. With regards to our recommendations, and we'll get into the reasons for these recommendations in the following slides. On the ownership side, we're recommending 20%, so increasing the overall number, and then all at low income, so increasing the affordability of these units as well. However, on the rental side, we're recommending that we maintain our present policy and instead highlight a 15% very low income alternative. And the primary reason for this is just the already difficult feasibility of rental projects in the city, and we'll get into it further in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So starting on the ownership side, this is how we compare to other cities in the Bay Area. You'll see San Carlos on the far left side. Our overall requirement for ownership projects is 15%, with 10% moderate in the light blue color and then 5% low in that medium blue color. If you compare this to the other cities on the slide, you'll see that we fall about in the middle. And so there is a bit of room for us to move up and not be leading out in front of all of the other cities. Next slide, please. And so with this in mind, we work closely with EPS to run a number of feasibility scenarios. So to get an idea of how our current ordinance impacts feasibility of ownership projects and what we could do to either increase the number of BMR units while not prohibiting future development. So the first item I want to call out here is this first row is the eligible density bonus. And this is in reference to the state density bonus. So we have a state bonus and a city bonus. They're separate items. The state bonus is something that we do not have any control over. The numbers are set by the state and we are compelled to abide by them. And so you'll see that our current ordinance automatically triggers a 10% density bonus. So if a hypothetical 28 unit project came along, it would immediately be eligible to move up to become a 31 unit project, so 3 bonus units. Now, our estimation is that project would achieve a 17 and about a 0.5% profit margin, which is generally considered a healthy profit margin in today's market. So with that in mind, it looks like there is perhaps some room for us to increase our requirement. And so the scenario that we are recommending is an increase to 20% at low income. That would automatically trigger a 35% bonus. So that 28 unit project would become a 38 unit project with 10 bonus units. And the profit margin would actually increase by about 1%. So even though we're getting more BMR units, the impact of that state density bonus also improves the profitability of that project. You'll notice on the far right of this slide, there are a few other scenarios. So if we look at the one on the very far right, S7, that would be a 24% inclusionary ordinance all at low income. And what that does is it triggers the maximum state density bonus of 50%. So that 28 unit project becomes a 42 unit project, and the profit margin actually increases further. The reason we're not recommending that is because not every project is able to utilize that full 50% bonus. And we have some projects come in that simply their sites don't work to achieve that bonus. And sometimes by adding that many units, you change the construction type of the project and it becomes more expensive. And we have heard from a number of developers that that's not something we're interested in. So what we're trying to do is strike a balance between adding BMR units, taking advantage of the density bonus, but not necessarily making it a requirement that all developments have to use that 50% bonus to be feasible. Next slide, please. So now looking at the rental side of our ordinance, once again, you'll see San Carlos at the far left side of this graph. And our 10% very low income requirement is seen in the dark blue, and then the 5% low income in the medium blue. So if you look at our overall requirement of 15%, we appear to be on par with other cities in the area. However, if you break it down by those income levels, you'll see that our 10% very low income requirement is among the most aggressive in the area. The only other cities that meet or go beyond that requirement for very low income units are Los Altos at 15%. However, that's an alternative to a 20% low income requirement. So you do not necessarily have to provide those units at very low income. Similarly, Palo Alto has a 10% very low income and then low income requirement, but only for projects that are greater than 5 acres. Next slide, please. So we then ran the scenarios on the rental side as well. And so if we start with our current ordinance, it already automatically triggers a 32.5% density bonus. So if we take a base project of 59 units, it would jump up to 78 units. And then it would, we believe, achieve an estimated yield on cost of 4.9%. And so for rental projects, you use yield on cost rather than profit margins, simply because rental projects compared to condominium projects estimate their profitability differently, since you're not bringing in all the money as soon as you sell the units and it's coming in over time. But generally in today's market, about a 5% yield on cost is the threshold for a project to move forward. So at 4.9%, you'll see that we're very close and perhaps slightly below that threshold. And it's a possible explanation for why we're seeing so few rental projects in the city. We tried to come up with other scenarios that both increase the number of BMR units and then also increase the yield on cost to make these projects more feasible. And the closest we could come up to is a 15% very low income requirement. And that pulls in the automatic 50% maximum state density bonus, but it only increases the yield on cost slightly to 5%. And additionally, as we said earlier, not all projects want to utilize that full 50% bonus. Out of curiosity, we also ran the numbers on what would happen if a project didn't require BMR units, because we wanted to get an idea of how our inclusionary ordinance is impacting the profitability of these projects. So you'll see on the far right, that 59 unit project with no BMR units, and the yield on cost goes up to 5.2%. So a slight increase, but still not significant enough to the point where we think it would be beneficial to get rid of our BMR ordinance. And so for those reasons, we're recommending that we maintain our existing ordinance on the rental side, but that we highlight that 15% option to achieve the 50% bonus for those that wish to do so. And the other thing I'll note here is that if our requirement is 10% very low at 5% low, the developer could still opt to move forward with that 15% very low, regardless of what our ordinance says, since that would be going for a deeper level of affordability. Next slide, please. So with all of this in mind, we were trying to come up with ways to help improve the feasibility of rental projects in San Carlos. One option we've considered is enhancing our city density bonus. So like the state bonus, we have a separate city density bonus. And currently, the bonus is 1 bonus unit for every low income or lower unit. It's very rarely utilized, and generally that's because the state density bonus is much more favorable. So one option the council could consider is what we're referring to as an enhanced city density bonus, which would equal 4 bonus units for every low income unit and 2 bonus units for every low income unit. And so if you compare that to our current city density bonus, a 100 unit project would result in 15 BMR units and then 15 bonus units. Under the state density bonus, you would go up to 133 total units. And under this enhanced city density bonus, you go up to 150 units. So while we did come up with this option, it's not the one we are recommending. We believe it would be more appropriate for the council to try and achieve this improved feasibility for rental projects through the general plan update. And the reason for that is this enhanced city density bonus would be a blanket bonus to all projects around the city. But through the general plan, you could target where you want to increase things like density and height limits and aim your improved bonus and improved feasibility for rental projects in the specific areas where you want those developments to occur. Next slide, please. And then there are a few additional revisions we would like you to consider. The first is the BMR threshold. So currently all projects of 7 or more units have to build a unit. With the change to going up to 20% requirement for ownership projects, that threshold will lower to 5 units for ownership projects. It would still remain 7 units in rental developments. And then with regards to affordability periods, we would like you to consider extending them to be in perpetuity. Our current code states that they cannot be less than 45 years, for ownership units and not less than 55 years for rental units, but we are able to extend that if we would like and even go to in perpetuity. And then finally, we're trying to improve fair access to parking, and there are some concerns around unbundled parking projects that come forward, that then parking spaces are no longer attainable for BMR tenants in those projects. So we're looking at ways to try and prevent that from happening in the future without completely prohibiting unbundled parking. And some of the ways we could do that for rental units are to define rent to include all fees paid for parking, and then require that BMR units be offered amenities such as parking at a rate equivalent to those of market rate units. And then for ownership units, require that BMR units include parking spaces at a ratio equivalent to that of market rate units. And what we would then do is develop a formula that would develop a reduced price for those spaces for a BMR unit tenant to buy if they wish to do so. Next slide, please. And so then this slide just summarizes all of the areas we are seeking your feedback tonight. So first, just for ownership projects, we would like to increase the BMR requirement to 20% at all low income. On rental projects, we are not recommending any change to the current requirements, and just that we highlight the 15% very low income alternative. And then with regards to trying to improve rental feasibility, one option is to enhance the city density bonus to be 4 bonus units for a very low income unit, 2 bonus units for a low income unit. But the other option would be to try and make changes through the general plan update to increase height limits and density in certain areas to make those projects more feasible. And then we would also like to lower the requirement to build a BMR unit from 7 to 5 units for ownership projects, change affordability periods to run in perpetuity, and develop a portion of the ordinance that ensures fair BMR access to parking. With that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions you may have, and Darren is available as well.
Thank you, Adam. That was a great presentation, and I know a lot of work went into taking that deep dive into all of these options. So thank you for that. Do any of my colleagues have questions for Adam? I see Council Member Dugan, and then we'll go to Council Member Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And yeah, thank you, Adam. I know this has been a extensive project, and I'm glad to see we're honing in on some specifics here. And I'm excited about much of this. Even from my days on the Planning Commission, we observed some of these issues. Top level, though, you know, what we're trying to solve is, I think we've had an observation as a city that rentals are being developed in town. Condos are being developed in town, but rentals much less so. And there's a perception we need to balance that. And we've kind of had that as our running assumption throughout that, you know, I share that observation. I have that sense. But, you know, I've had the occasion to confer with other council members in the county, how they're thinking about housing. And like, for example, our neighbor to the south, Redwood City, reports that they're mostly approving rental projects, and some of pretty good scale. And so my only question is we're launched into this effort to, you know, incentivize rental versus ownership to some extent. Is this a, you know, in the context of our region, is this a problem we really do need to solve in San Carlos?
So from what we've seen, when we compare our rental inventory to other cities in San Mateo County, we do have a much lower inventory than neighboring communities, and we do see much less rental developments, just as you pointed out in Redwood City. I do believe part of that is related to our current zoning requirements that are being looked at through the general plan update. Another part is that in places like Redwood City, we have larger parcels that make it easier to develop these larger projects, and we don't have a lot of that in San Carlos. So that does play a factor as well.
Okay, thank you. My second question would be on the, well, you know, I do like our consideration of a city density bonus. I think that's creative. And I know there was initially some talk about relaxing our BMR requirements, and I'm glad we're approaching this problem through additional density as well. Intrigued by your thought that perhaps that should be handled in conjunction with the general plan update so that we could target that and be a little bit more intentional on where that additional bonus density may end up. With that though, where would that put the timing? If you could just give me a quick overview of what, we're providing this input here this evening, when will this update formally come back to us approximately? And if we do defer that density bonus to the general plan update, when would that, what's the soonest that may end up approved?
So I'll speak to the timing of this BMR ordinance update, and then I'll ask Al Savay to chime in and provide more info on the general plan update. With regards to this update, we're just seeking your feedback tonight through the study session. And then depending on the feedback you provide, our next step would be to go back to the Planning Commission for a formal recommendation. And I believe we could do that within the next month or two, and then we return to the City Council soon after. So within the next few weeks after that Planning Commission meeting.
Okay, so roughly 2 months or so is the rough timing on this?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And so, Councilmember Duggan, the general plan housing element is about a year away from completion.
Okay, so 2 months versus a year on that. Okay, thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you, John. Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As a member of this particular subcommittee, I had the opportunity to attend a lot of meetings with John and staff, and I've got to say that the job that has been done is so thorough. I don't normally enjoy these reports, and this one was quite long, but I read all of it over the weekend, and it was just, I think it's just brilliant, and I really appreciate all the work that's been put into it. I don't know if this question is for Adam or Darren, but toward the end of the report, there is a mention of in lieu fees, and the thought was that we might want to consider that. And I'm wondering why there was not a discussion of that tonight. Is that because we've generally moved past that as a council and we decided that we really don't want to employ the in lieu fee concept? I was trying to make sense of that. So I'm wondering if you could maybe give us your thoughts on that.
That's correct. I think generally we've heard feedback that we don't want to lose the production of BMR units. And while in lieu fees are an alternative and perhaps they do make some projects more feasible, part of that is because you're not actually obtaining the actual units at the end of the project. And the in lieu fee doesn't always capture the true cost of developing those actual units.
That was my sense of it too. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. We'll go to Vice Mayor Rack and then Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Adam, thank you for the presentation. I will say I loved having the outline ahead of time. It's really helpful to kind of know what to expect. So thank you for the thoroughness in that as well. I had a couple questions. Let me just start with I think one of the easiest ones is, so this is dealing with really, when we look at the BMR, it's dealing with that regulation. Is it limited to areas that are zoned for multifamily housing?
So this would apply across the entire city. So anywhere a residential project would happen would be required to include BMR units.
Okay, so I know that we have the sort of urgency ordinance around SB 9, and so if we were to within 2 months do this BMR ordinance, would that preclude us from doing anything separately on SB 9 around affordability?
No, that wouldn't. If you wanted to do something within SB 9 related to affordability, that could certainly be done with that as well. Okay, got it. Thank you. That's helpful on that one. Next one was, what do we on the parking, unbundled parking? Do we allow developers to unbundle parking now, or does that have to be part of an agreement that we put that they have to request from us? So if that's the case, why wouldn't we just say, if you have a BMR unit, we're not going to let you unbundle the parking as a fairness? Mm-hmm. We do currently allow unbundled parking. We've only had it happen on one occasion that I'm aware of, and that's kind of what raised this as an issue for us because that particular development did include BMR units. Part of the reason we haven't said no to unbundled parking entirely is because with some of the reduced parking requirements that have come into play through some of the different state bills and other transit-oriented demand type projects, not all projects are required to provide one-to-one parking for units. So there are some cases where there's less parking than there is the number of units. And so we don't necessarily want to say, make it harder for them to figure out who gets those parking units.
I see, because there's not one, but okay, so I guess I want to think through that one a little more, because to me, the equity piece might be better to just say, we're not going to allow unbundling of BMR units, right? So we, if there's parking, then there's, but I see where that could be in conflict if not everyone has access to parking. So, okay, I want to think through that one, but I appreciate the clarification on that. And then my last question is, can we, I've noticed like we've got, under the current ordinance, you've got some developers who have, built 6 units instead of 7, let's say on ownership units. And those units are, I would argue, pretty large units. I've seen them advertised as, over 2,000 square feet, 2,200, 2,400 square foot units. So basically to me, that's, I know they're paying into the Affordable Housing Fund, but we're not getting any units out of that. And they're building, in that case, 12, 13, 14,000 square feet of homes, right? So to me, I would like to kind of try to close that loophole and see if we could do anything around square footage. I know we're lowering the threshold, but if someone's going to build 4 units at 2,500 square feet, to me, they're it's a loophole that is allowing them to skirt having to build a unit if something's that size. Is that something you can look at legally to say, if you hit a certain threshold of size, there is no in lieu fee, you have to build a unit regardless of the, our 5 and under or 7 and under ordinance?
Yeah, it's something we could look into further. I'm not familiar with any other jurisdictions doing it. I think there's benefits and negatives to it. So say hypothetically, if we set a 1,000 square foot minimum, you might have projects that are coming in right below that. And so you might get more units, but fewer BMR units. And then I know Darren has some experience with this in other communities, so I'll let him speak to that as well real quick.
Thank you, Adam. Yes, the city of Santa Rosa and Sonoma County both have, for a long time, allowed units under a certain size to not pay an in lieu fee or be subject to affordability. The intention of that is that those smaller units tend to be somewhat more affordable anyway. Mm-hmm. Frankly, I'm not sure that's the case in San Carlos, where small units are going for over $1,000 a square foot, kind of no matter what. But there are examples, including those 2 that I've just mentioned, where they are basing the requirements on the size of the units. So if that's something you're interested in, I can certainly work with Adam to think about how that might work and whether it might yield greater affordability in San Carlos. Off the top of my head, I'm not convinced that it would, but there are those precedents in California.
Okay, thanks, Darren. I appreciate that. And I think, so I'd be interested in learning more about that. I think partially from my end is less so maybe the under level versus, if you're over building 4 units over 2,000 square feet, you're I don't know, that sort of at that point, you would have to include an affordable unit would be sort of if the project was over X number of square feet, then that would trigger not the in lieu fee, but you'd have to put a unit in. That's sort of how I'm thinking about it, because we have these projects that have, as I mentioned, 12, 14,000 square feet, and they're paying a small fee into it versus putting a unit in. And it seems to me like that's sort of going against the intention of the BMR ordinance. So I'd love to have us look into it if the council would agree to look at that.
Another way to potentially address that, once again, through the general plan, is by setting minimum density requirements in certain areas where that's a concern.
Okay, yeah, or I guess we can raise the in lieu fee, right? Would be the other option around that to do that. So I'd be interested in looking at kind of all those options, and I appreciate the time on that. And that I have no further questions, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. We'll move to Councilmember Palmer-Lohan.
Thank you. So there's a consistent theme that we talk about this, I think, every time we talk about housing in our community, and that is that the lot size on order in San Carlos are a bit smaller as a community than some of our neighboring cities and towns. So could you talk, Adam, to what extent did that come into consideration as you're bringing together these recommendations? Because I think what I picked up in the report is that, that 5% threshold is really important to inspire development. And I see that there's, a proposal that we consider increasing the density bonus to higher than what state is allowing. How feasible is that, given the size lots that we have to, the developers have to work with in San Carlos? And have we connected with them to try to understand if, these parameters that we are laying out would, inspire them to, cobble together a couple of different, pieces of land, right? So that's the part that I'm trying to wrap my head around. And I think it could potentially solve what Vice Mayor Rack is concerned about, right? Is if they can get more units on a project, we'll get those affordable, lower priced units built, right? Which is the challenge with the smaller lots. So I'm trying to figure out what all of our angles are and options.
Yeah, so it certainly is an issue with those smaller lots, because even if you increase the density on them, it requires them to go up taller to squeeze all those units in. It can change the construction type and then the cost of the project per square foot. But if you increase the density sizably enough, it does help to encourage the assemblage of lots, because it becomes more beneficial to do so. And so that's one thing we've heard, is that, the more units someone can get out of a project, the more willing they are to try and pull together different lots to make it work. I don't know if Darren has anything he wants to add to that as well.
Nope. Well said, Adam. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say, Adam, is if council accepts your recommendation here, there's a likelihood that developers will pull together a couple of different lots on which maybe to build a larger project, and we could get more affordable units created.
Yes, we believe that's what will happen.
Great. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. I almost called you Madam Mayor again. Councilmember Palmer-Lohan. I have two questions, and then Don, I see your hand raised, so I'll circle back and we can do a second round of questions. I'm figuring that there will be a lot of questions and discussion on this topic tonight, so we will do a second round. Adam, my question for you is, how many projects come in using the state density bonus? Is it increasing, and is it your expectation that we'll continue to see more and more projects coming in using the state density bonus?
It's certainly increasing. I would say a few years ago, it was very rare for projects to utilize the state density bonus. And in the last couple of years, it's become much more common. There have been occasions where developers haven't been aware of the bonus, and then realize the project's going to actually work once they do become aware of it. And another change is that recently, within the last year or so, the density bonus was increased by the state. So previously the maximum was 35%, and now it's 50%. And so I think that has also encouraged a number of developers to utilize it.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that clarification. My second question is regarding rental units. And I remember the discussion when we decided on the 10% very low and 5% low. And I appreciate the comparisons with other cities and noting that our policy is more aggressive than other cities. And I think our thinking at that time was that we were just having a very difficult time getting these units built so very low, and they just weren't coming forward from private developers. And it seems like that hasn't changed based on your charts. These rental units are being built now by public-private partnerships that the city has been working on. So I guess my question is, and I also note that in the packet it said the city's inclusionary requirement plays a smaller impact on project feasibility than broader market conditions such as land, labor, and construction costs. So we're running into market issues that are out of our control. So I'm wondering if staff has put some thought into the carrots that we can offer to developers to make sure that these very low units are part of projects. Is it mainly, the density, and we'll see that through the housing element, or are there any other creative carrots that we can offer to bring these units forward?
When we've spoken with developers in the past, the main thing we've heard that could improve the likelihood of these projects moving forward is increasing density, or the other option that we tried to develop is this density bonus. So I think one of those options would be the most likely to try and improve the feasibility and likelihood of these projects coming forward. I think either one would work, either the city enhanced density bonus or doing it through the general plan update. It's more a matter of, do you want that city bonus to apply to the entire city and to all projects, or do you want to focus it on certain areas where it appears to be most appropriate?
Thanks, Adam. I appreciate that. I will now take questions from Councilmember Dugan, and then we'll turn back to Vice Mayor Rack.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Adam, a couple follow-ups. I had a list of issues in our BMR ordinance that I kind of honed in my time on the Planning Commission, and I know I brought these up several times. I'm just wondering if they were considered more by staff and not brought forward for a reason, or if this is something we should also discuss tonight. But the one I guess I'll say I'm most passionate about is basing our ordinance principally on number of units. So we had one of those newer buildings in El Camino. I was on planning when that one came through, and we watched that developer basically game our system, because by basing it on number of units, they very intentionally designed the two required BMR units as particularly small one-bedroom type units. And I think, even though the number of units met the 15% threshold, I believe on a square footage basis, it was well less than 10%. And I really didn't like that. And working with the city's attorney, we were basically told there wasn't much we could do. It met the letter of our code. And so I think it's an easy reform. It's basically would just base it, instead of number of units, it would be based on residentially occupiable square footage. So, you'd exclude the hallways and the common areas, but of the property inside of residences, you'd also exclude commercial, but of the residences, 15 or 20%, wherever we come out on the percentage, it would be based on occupiable square footage, not on the number of units, which again, I believe not only can it be gamed, I've seen it gamed under our present code. Was that something you guys considered, Adam? And, should we further consider that at this point?
So one thing our code does state is that BMR units, the bedroom sizes have to be comparable to what the market rate units are. So you can't put all 1-bedroom units and then have all 3-bedroom market rate units. That does get tricky with smaller projects. So if it's an 8 or 9 unit project and half of them are 2 bedrooms and half of them are 1 bedrooms, there's only 1 BMR unit, it's hard for us to say it can't be the 1-bedroom unit. So that is an issue. My concern with the occupiable square feet is you may get some developers that try to game that by saying, okay, I'm going to meet your square footage requirements, but I'm only going to do 2 BMR units and they're both going to be 4,000 square feet in corners of the building that nobody else really wants to live in. That's, I think, the primary concern with that approach. I'm not aware of other cities doing it, but it is something we could look into further if there is a consensus to do so.
Yeah, thank you. I think I would like staff to look at that a bit more. I think, you raise a good point. So maybe it's a hybrid of the two. But even just saying the bedrooms need to match, I mean, we saw that very actively gamed, and you can make basically small units with small bedrooms and meet that per unit. That one property that really highlighted it for me. And the good news is most of our developers have met the spirit of the code and have designed units that are very comparable to the other units. This particular developer made it very clear he was gaming, and it worked. So we did the math when we were looking at it, and instead of, when you measured it by occupiable square footage, and again, it complied with the letter of our code, I believe it was like 8.5% of the occupiable square footage instead of the 15%. It was pretty dramatic, and I was just very disappointed by that. So if there could be some hybrid of, occupiable square footage needs to be comparable, as well as the number of bedrooms comparable. And I think that would work in both directions, Adam, meaning if it's comparable square footage, you couldn't design a really big one either. It would have to be kind of on the average. I see what my colleagues feel about that, but I think that's an important one because it has been gamed in the past. The second one, a simpler one, is I also observed developers who would cluster the BMR units together. They would all be like on one floor and one end of the building. And I also just didn't like that, and my fellow planning commissioners didn't like that. And we required more than one developer to kind of move those off the same floor. So I think we should make, unless there's a reason staff feels we shouldn't, I would propose that we also just have a sentence or two that just says the BMR units need to be, distributed through the development and not clustered. I think that is much preferable than putting them in, together in the back bottom of the building.
Our code does currently say that units have to be evenly distributed throughout the building, but we can certainly review that language, and when we come back to you, review it, and if it needs to be strengthened, do that as well.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. If that's there, if we could look at that, and if you could highlight that for me, I'd appreciate it. I know when we were looking at that at planning, no one mentioned that to us, so we were left with the impression that we had to basically insist upon that in our process because it wasn't already spelled out for the developer. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councilmember Dugan. We'll go to Vice Mayor Rack.
Mayor, I just had two follow-up questions as well. One, just kind of reflecting a little bit about the proposed change for ownership units. I guess I'm just a little bit concerned and want to understand. So we're basically eliminating what I would say the ability or what would happen to have any sort of moderate units built in the city. So we're sort of cutting out a whole segment of, I think, sort of a level of economic, economics that aren't going to be built for, right? I mean, had you thought about having sort of a I'm supportive of getting this sort of to the 20% threshold. I see the benefit of that, but did you think about having some bit of moderate in there so that we can maintain the development of moderate income units in the city?
So I think there's two levels to that. Part of it is for the state density bonus, you can't combine income levels. So if we did a 15% low income and 5% moderate, they'd only get credit for the 15% low income rather than the 20% they're previously getting. The other side to it is our affordable housing wait list. We have noticed we have extremely few moderate income households on the wait list, and we've had difficulty selling some of the smaller moderate rate units in the past, and the city has had to acquire a couple of them that we will then look into either renting out or perhaps converting to a low or very low income level if the council wishes to do so. But then the other thing I'll add to that is there are other programs we're looking into to try and capture that moderate income level or the missing middle. And there's conversion programs that have different joint powers authorities that work together to try and acquire market rate projects to then convert to those moderate income units. And so we're looking at a couple of those right now, and within this year plan to bring a few of those to you for ideas for the city to join them and hopefully enable them to acquire properties within the city.
Okay, that's helpful. I appreciate that. That's good information. And then my last question is, and I know I think I've sent some of this information into staff before. What I struggle with a little bit on the density bonus is we're, to me, giving away, I understand the rationale around it from the economics, but we're sort of giving away units, right? So in the example that you gave in the packet was a 100-unit apartment building could get 50%, if they had the 15%, they could get 50 more units. And so now our level of affordability in that project is well below the 15%. And so I feel like, to me, we're giving away a significant number of units in the bonus, but we're not getting anything out of it. We're getting more units in the community, but we're not getting any additional affordable units. And I know that working with and checking in with Senator Becker's office, that they found that there are other communities that have required that you maintain, regardless of the bonus, we're allowed to maintain the affordability levels, so that we'd have to say, keep that 15% throughout that. So the bonus would include, in that case, the 50, you get 7.5. So you could figure out how you do that, right? In terms of units. So is that something you looked at? Is that something we can look at? I know that it's been done in other communities. I just want to kind of get your thoughts around that.
Yeah, so it is something we've looked into, and there are other communities that are doing it. Frankly, the concern is we're not confident legally on what's justifiable yet. There's cities doing it right now, and it hasn't yet come to a head for them, but we haven't yet had a court ruling that's determined whether or not it's allowed. We've had some legal advice that says it's not allowed, and others that say we're not sure and we need more information. So frankly, we haven't moved forward with it just because we're not sure if we want to join that list of cities, and then if it is disallowed at a later date, be among them or not.
Okay, but could we potentially do that if we did, I'm guessing maybe the difference between the state density bonus and if we did our own density bonus, that we might be on stronger legal footing potentially in that aspect, because we're creating the rule around that versus the state rule? Is that if we kind of were to separate the two?
It's possible. I think I would need more legal advice on that one, because technically they would be.
Excuse me, Adam.
Go ahead, Greg.
That's a good point. This is good issue spotting for us to research when we bring back the permanent ordinance. So I think that's one we'll look at for you, Councilmember.
Great. Thank you. Perfect. That's all the questions I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I'm looking at my colleagues. I don't see anyone else with their hands raised. So that was a great rapid fire question session. And now I will open it up to public comments, and then we'll come back to discussion among the council. So if you'd like to make a public comment on this item, which is the BMR ordinance update, you can raise your hand in Zoom or call in. Crystal, is there anyone in the waiting room waiting to speak on this topic?
Yes, I see 3 hands at the moment. First up is David Crabb. You should be able to unmute.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of the council. This is Dave Crabb. I'm going to speak in turn for the Sierra Club Sustainable Land Use Committee tonight. Specifically, I want to talk to you about the unbundled parking. I'm a little confused about what the proposal is. Sierra Club Sustainable Land Use Committee is very much in favor of unbundled parking in all projects, because we feel that it potentially dramatically reduces the cost of units. I would hate to see whatever it comes out of this discussion discourage developers from doing unbundled parking. And it also, I guess, relates to the number of spaces required. Let's say if you have a project that requires 1.5 spaces per unit or 2 spaces per unit, then maybe you could have one space per unit that's included in the rent and the rest is unbundled. But we'd even prefer to have it all unbundled because it could potentially be someone that is in one of those low income units that really, if you add the cost of the parking in there, really couldn't afford that unit. So if you could look at that a little closer and try to at least, or maybe you can answer now what you're thinking on that is, because I was a little confused on the discussion. So we really want to see unbundled parking in all new projects because we think it reduces the cost of the units themselves, and it also potentially reduces the number of cars that will be parked, which of course from a Sierra Club's point of view is what we want, is to reduce traffic. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David. I appreciate that. We're going to take all of the public comments and then we'll circle back for answers from staff.
Okay, next up is Kalisha Webster. You should be able to unmute.
Good evening, council members. My name is Kalisha Webster, and I'm a housing advocate for people with developmental and other disabilities with Housing Choices. For over 25 years, Housing Choices has advocated for increased accessibility to affordable housing for people with developmental disabilities, as well as providing housing navigation and retention services to support those wanting to live independently in integrated community housing. As part of the housing element update process, the city is required to analyze and plan for the housing needs of specific special needs populations, including people with developmental disabilities served by the Golden Gate Regional Center. For a person with a developmental disability, the greatest barrier to accessing housing is cost. The Department of Developmental Services estimates that less than 15% of California residents with developmental disabilities are gainfully employed, and so are instead dependent on fixed incomes of around $1,000 per month from disability benefits. As you consider these updates to the inclusionary housing ordinance, we urge you to consider how the ordinance can also encourage development of extremely low income level units. Development of these units is most needed by people with developmental disabilities, as well as other special needs populations on fixed or extremely low incomes who are at the highest risk of homelessness or displacement. However, these units are least likely to be developed because of the difficulty in financing these units under current state and local financing programs. One way to increase financial feasibility of these units is by offering an alternative means of compliance, which allows for a lower percentage of units to be below market rate if they are targeted to extremely low income households, and allowing for higher density bonuses or additional incentives and concessions in the city's local density program beyond what is allowed in the state density bonus law for projects which include these units. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalisha.
Thank you. And the last hand up right now is David Tusman.
Hello, my name is David Tusman. I'm a resident here in San Carlos. I thank the staff for the presentation. I think this is a really important item to discuss. It sounds like the council is engaged and interested in seeing what works. And particularly, I thought it was great to include the feasibility impact of these changes. It's so critical to get a clear picture of that. We're aiming for more units overall, of course. So if we increase BMR requirement percentage to a point where we end up with fewer total projects and units because it makes it less feasible, then obviously we've gone the wrong direction. So it's good to see that. However, it wasn't clear how that was considered with the suggestion to increase the time period that these units would be deed restricted affordable. I was wondering if staff or council could ask a bit more about that. And similarly, when looking at nearby cities' levels of BMR requirement, it'd be interesting to see what sort of unit production they've achieved with those constraints. Again, like if it kills the number of units, when it becomes infeasible. Also wondering if our city currently or is exploring having other allowances and waivers that are triggered by affordability levels. You know, in addition to allowable units, do we relax constraints like heights, setbacks, or parking requirements? I've heard that some developers have said these constraints can often make things even more attractive and impactful than additional units. I personally don't like the idea of using the housing element general plan to pick and choose specific areas where the city would implement the improved city density bonuses and withhold them from other areas. We already have a very constrained multifamily zoning in town, just along El Camino and downtown. Doesn't seem like a good idea or good use of time and energy to further restrict where this bonus would apply. And as you know, the RHNA numbers come with a requirement for housing elements to, quote, affirmatively further fair housing. If these density bonuses are meant to incentivize the creation of BMR units, and we only focus them in specific locations as opposed to integrating them throughout the city, that to me doesn't seem to affirmatively further fair housing. Then two final thoughts. Oh,
you take 5 seconds to wrap up, please.
No, it's okay. Thanks for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Okay, our callers mentioned a few issues that, Adam, maybe you could take a moment to respond to. First was some clarification on the unbundled parking and how that would work, if that's free. And then secondly, about the extremely low unit. Maybe you could tackle those two things first.
So with regards to the unbundled parking, the idea is that the price for the parking would then remain under what's considered an affordable price for that unit. So the goal isn't to add any additional cost for those BMR tenants. It's to try and make sure that that cost is included in the price that they would already be paying. And then with regards to the extremely low income units, we looked at extremely low income units briefly. We could look at them in more depth, but generally, as the caller stated, if we did extremely low income units, we would probably need to lower the overall percentage of units. We could perhaps offer that as an alternative to our current requirements. I don't have a good idea at the moment, though, of what would appropriate percentage be if we were to go with extremely low income units.
Okay, thank you. And then the third caller talked about the time period for deed restrictions. Would you be able to speak to that a little bit? And then he had a question about other allowances and waivers for developers to kind of, I think I mentioned this too, to kind of have a little more carrots to get these units built.
So with regards to the time period on deed restrictions, so far we haven't heard a concern from the development community that extending these deed restrictions would make their projects infeasible. For most cases, projects aren't looking more than 45, 55 years out to determine whether or not their project is worth moving forward. That might be the case for some more long hold property developers, but it's not extremely common. And then I'm sorry, could you repeat what the second question was again?
Offering additional allowances and waivers on height, setbacks, and parking requirements.
Yes. So as part of the state density bonus, the bonus also applies to the number of units, but in addition to that, there's a sliding scale based on the level of affordability and the number of units that provided that then trigger a certain number of concessions. So it'd be 1 or 2 or 3 concessions to things like parking requirements and height limits. So those opportunities do already exist under the state density bonus.
Thank you, Adam. I'm going to ask a follow-up question, then I'll open it up to my colleagues for discussion. When a developer triggers the state density bonus, can they go above our zoning requirements anywhere in the city, or can it only be in certain zoned areas?
It could be anywhere. There's not a limitation on that. It would need to be zoned for residential, but other than that.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'll open it up to discussion now, my colleagues. Who would like to kick us off? We have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, oh, sorry.
I'll go to Councilmember Collins. He had his hand raised, and then I'll go over to Councilmember Farmer-Lohan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think a lot of good questions have been asked, but I hope we don't lose sight of the fact that at the end of this process, we want to make this ordinance so that developers are attracted to build units. If we keep packing it with restrictions and modifications and changes, I fear that we're going to end up almost back where we started. This has been well studied. I I agree that there probably ought to be some modifications, things like, looking at unbundled parking and things like that. But I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that we're looking for a practical, workable solution that is going to make building more apartments and multifamily ownership in town more attractive to developers. Because if we don't do that, we're not going to be successful in getting the results that we're all after. So I just, I think I said earlier tonight, let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Let's get something that makes sense. And we may not get everything we want, but we want to make some progress.
Thanks, Ron. Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate Councilmember Collins's comments, because what's going through my mind is that there's a lot of aspects to this that staff is asking us to comment on tonight, provide direction. And I think the thing I want to say is echoing what Councilmember Collins says, which is we're in the midst of a housing crisis. And we know that production has been slow in San Carlos with respect to rental properties and multifamily ownership opportunities. And so, I would just like to provide staff with the direction is to, come back with that compelling ordinance that will inspire developers to put together projects for us and get these units built. A little concerned about the parking requirement and having that bundled. That's a conversation that we have at Home for All Steering Committee, that the cost of that land is very pricey, and there's a cost opportunity cost associated with it if we require a certain level of parking. And if we're looking at a lot of these projects to take place downtown, I agree. I don't want us to get in the way of success by trying to control the outcome here. We know what we have on the books right now is not working. And I think we need to loosen up our criteria. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmer Lohan. I'll turn it over to Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And I certainly share my colleagues. I hear them that, we want this to get more housing done. It's certainly a top goal of ours as a city. And that's what we're here for. I've been cycling on the subcommittee on this for some time. And a lot of what's here are things we wrestled with on the Planning Commission. And honestly, I just applaud staff's effort. And I think this is a very solid set of recommendations and just a fantastic foundation. I mean, I'm not sure what my colleagues' specific concerns are on how we're going to put a drag on the system. I mean, I'm a bit struck by the simple fact that, our going in is that we want more rental development, even more so than ownership development. And actually, this proposal makes no change to our rental because it still is at the 15%, and it just adds an option that was already available to the developer. But and that's why we need to do something besides that. And I think it's I really appreciate the work we did to conclude that 20% low income is very feasible for the ownership condos. And I think that, and it's in alignment with a lot of our neighboring communities. So we're not going to be standing out on that. And that will result in more units being developed in town more BMR units being developed when they are condos, and we have a long history of condo development. And it might get a couple developers to rethink whether it should be a rental development or not. And that's exactly what we want. So I think this is a great foundation to work from. I really appreciated Adam's thought when it comes to the density bonuses. We saw that take place with that Walnut development where, we were just kind of struck by that state density bonus coming into play. And it just felt like there weren't enough BMR units because of that density. And we asked a lot of questions around that. And at that time, I don't think other communities had even developed alternatives to that yet. I'm glad that other municipalities have been working on that. And, this is a time where we probably should be a bit more aggressive. Personally, I'd be up for joining that list of communities that want BMR as part of the density bonuses. And certainly if we do work on a city density bonus to even further encourage rental development, that would be our own policy. I can't imagine there's any reason we couldn't require the BMR ordinance to extend to city bonus development. So I personally would very much support that. And I think we should consider also requiring it for the state density bonus density as well. To that end, I think I do support being very thoughtful on how we apply the city density bonus. And I appreciate the concern that we should do all we can here. But these density bonuses are very significant. And I do think we need to look at what this will mean for heights and overshadowing some of our residential areas that are right on the border of some of our mixed use zoning. So I do support that as being part of the general plan discussion, which will also give us the time to very thoroughly study this one. On unbundled parking, I will just say that it is a good thing. The theory behind unbundled parking is the idea that parking is expensive around here as well. And so if it's not required for all units unbundled, then perhaps units and housing can be even more affordable because they're not taxed by requiring a parking space that, if you're down by, a transit hub, you might not even need. So the thought, and I think a caller referred to this, it makes it even more affordable if it's not required. As I understand the proposal from city staff, it basically just means the affordable units also have the ability to have unbundled parking, but they get the same discount on it. And that's what, when we wrestled with this at planning, we thought that would make the most sense, that not every BMR unit would have to have parking, but it would be available to them if they wanted it, if they were buying it, for example, and then it would be offered to them on the same discount. So whatever their BMR discount was, the parking would also be discounted in the same manner. So I just support staff's recommendation on that. I think that's the right way to go. And then I don't think, so I'm encouraged that it sounds like staff is confident that our mandate can't be gamed the way I saw it gamed with our existing code. I would like staff to look at that a bit more and make sure of that, and then just operationally make sure they're not sending projects through that have gamed it, that if it's 15% units, that we don't somehow end up with small BMR units and larger market rate units. And similar idea with the that they're evenly distributed, because I certainly saw proposals where BMR units weren't evenly distributed. But if that's in our code already, nothing needs to be done. But I want to make sure we're enforcing that one as well. That's a lot of stuff, a lot of complication here. But I just think this is a great foundation. I think what we're doing, and actually, I think the most important thing we're doing here tonight is making our BMR run in perpetuity. I mean, that has no impact on the feasibility of a project, because the feasibility just comes down to, do you get your loan or not? And loan horizons are never more than 25 years for this kind of stuff. So whether it's 45, 55 years or forever, it won't affect the projects, but can have a huge impact on the residents when they're living in BMR units that lose that designation. We saw that happen in Foster City, where 50, 60 folks were basically getting booted because their rents were going to quadruple. I have no way I think we're going to see us not having affordability issue 50 years from now. But if we somehow ended up with it not being an issue, there's no reason we the council at that time couldn't relax that at that point. But I think for the foreseeable future, I firmly support having these run with the land. So again, a lot of stuff. It's a detailed ordinance, but I think this is a really good first start. And I don't think this in any way is going to, be a problem for developments. I think this is all enhancing and just further encouraging rental units.
Thanks, Councilmember Dugan. I'll turn it over to Vice Mayor Rack.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to thank staff again for the great work on this and very thorough. I don't, and I understand hear what Ron's saying about the not wanting to derail the process, and by no means do I want to do that either. I think it's work, but I do think, and Ron and John have had a little more time to kind of work through this being on the subcommittee. So I just, obviously some of us are coming a little bit later in terms of some of the questions around this. And so certainly want to move this forward. I think this is a great foundation, as was mentioned before, and I look forward to sort of getting some more feedback from staff on the questions that we've provided. And I do hope that this ultimately ends up with more units to some degree, and more importantly, more affordable units for our community, and hopefully more rental units is something that we are low on. But I mean, to me, my sense and my understanding is that what's going to move the ball the most forward for us to get this to happen is addressing the issues around height, density, and setbacks that we can do as a part of a general housing move. That's going to be the thing that really triggers the developers to move forward. So I'm anxious to move forward on that aspect of our proposal, separate from the BMR side, because I do think that's where it's going to be the trigger. If developers can come in and say, yes, we can go higher, we can go denser, we're going to address some of the setback issues, that's going to be the real game changer overall for the growth of housing in our community, and that this BMR unit working with it will help bring along a significant amount of below market rate housing for us as well. So I think it's a great start. Looking forward to the next iteration and for us moving our overall housing ordinances forward as soon as we can. So thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks, Vice Mayor Rack. I'll go ahead and chime in now. I want to thank staff for taking this deep dive. This was an extremely thorough report. I spent several hours this weekend reading through it, as I'm sure my colleagues did as well. And I also want to thank the subcommittee, the housing subcommittee members. I know that both Ron and John have spent a lot of time working on this as well. So if I go down the recommendation summary, I appreciate suggestion number 1 and suggestion number 2. I'm struck by the slide 7 on rental scenarios that shows one rental scenario, all market rate, no BMR units, fairly penciled out. And so I understand, and having, I'm currently serving on the Housing Endowment and Regional Trust Board. It's, again, I harp on this a lot, but it's very expensive to build housing. And so I'm very interested in, really figuring out how we get these affordable units included in projects. I appreciate the effort in the staff report to identify win-win scenarios in which the development's affordability would be enhanced, while also ensuring that the project pencils out, because that's how we're going to see these projects move forward. I feel like there's general consensus that we all want to see the general plan updates play out. I think that's where I stand with number 3, especially given that the state density bonus can be applied anywhere in town. With number 4, I agree with that. I appreciate number 5, changing affordability periods to rent in perpetuity. And I do believe that we need to figure out unbundled parking for the lower income units. I think that is an equity issue, and it is something that we should be very mindful of. So I appreciated that discussion. I think in general, I'm still very interested in figuring out the carrots that we can offer to development projects to make sure that they can start happening. I think all of us on the council, I think our discussion tonight is evidence of our strong commitment to affordable housing. And all 5 of us want to ensure that this is a town where people of all income levels can thrive. I think the topic of affordable housing requirements and how to make affordable housing a reality is very complex, as we saw. It involves a lot of trade-offs and financial modeling. So I think this is a really valuable discussion to have tonight. I want to emphasize that all of us want to ensure that teachers and firefighters and restaurant workers and our own city employees have the opportunity to live in our community. I think we all feel that 100%. And while that city does not technically build housing, we do set the policies that attract these types of developments. And so I appreciate all of the discussion that we've had here tonight. I also do want to add that the suggestion of the city considering in lieu fees instead of providing inclusionary units on site is something that I continue to strongly disagree with. Having below market rate units included as part of a project is a gold standard in my book. And I think fees that are collected instantaneously depreciate due to the rising cost of land and labor and materials in our area. So I'm glad that that's not on the table tonight. With that, are there any points that we've missed? Or Adam, do you have any questions for, I see Councilmember Palmer Lohan has her hand raised. Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to address one of the callers talked about our community members with developmental disabilities and that the extremely low cost housing is vital to that community. And so just food for thought as we move forward, if there's any kind of fractional in lieu fee that's paid, because I saw that is a potential reality, Adam Aronson, if I recall correctly, that perhaps we make a commitment to potentially take those funds and purchase the very low income units and convert them, right? So that we're not losing sight of the fact that there are community members who do need that extremely low housing. So just, again, food for thought for future discussion.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Laura. Thank you for bringing that up. I meant to talk about that too. I too would love to hear some creative ideas from staff on extremely low units and what we can do to move the needle on that. Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And yeah, I just wanted to briefly highlight that what we're doing here, especially around the city density bonus, would be very innovative, very impactful. So, you know, we did talk about a lot of details, and I can understand the perception that, boy, that we're adding complexity. A lot of that is kind of detail, just making it all make more sense. This city density bonus is potentially very impactful. I mean, we will, especially if we make it as part of the general plan update, it'll be thoroughly studied. But that's kind of our, that will be a marquee program in San Carlos that will generate many additional BMR units and many market rate units, so that we can all feel good we're doing a lot to encourage housing in San Carlos when we get that city density bonus figured out. And also making this all run in perpetuity is a very strong move tonight that is very supportive of housing here in San Carlos.
Are there any other comments? Or Adam, do you have any questions for us? Any points of clarification that you need?
I don't believe so. This was very helpful. And I know, as many of you said, this is a very complex topic. So we really appreciate y'all taking the time to dive deeply into this and provide us with some very good feedback that we'll all take in and bring back to you at another time.
Thank you, Adam. And thanks very much to your team. Okay, I see that it is now 9 o'clock. It's been 2 hours. So I'm wondering if there's interest among my colleagues for a 10-minute break before we start the beekeeping agenda item. Okay.
Sounds good.
Great. 10 minutes. minute for the Vice Mayor. We've got the Vice Mayor here, so we'll move on to item 8D, study session discussing the city's beekeeping regulations and administrative policy and provide direction on recommended updates or changes to staff. We have our Assistant City Manager, Niall Blackburn, here tonight. Niall, go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. I'm excited to present this evening, my first staff report to all of you. And it's quite a change from the previous topic. For this study session, which is what it is, on beekeeping regulations in San Carlos, staff's goal this evening is to do three things. Present a report on current beekeeping regulations in the city of San Carlos, share what seems to be the prevailing public opinion on these regulations as gleaned from emails, letters, and a meeting that I've had. And finally, to get direction from all of you on how to proceed. As mentioned, this is a study session. And so what I hope to do is get all of your input and come back at a later date with a proposed solution based upon your input. Right now in San Carlos, we have two regulations related to beekeeping. They are Chapter 6.04 of the San Carlos Municipal Code and a beekeeping practices administrative policy. Let's go ahead and do a deeper dive into each of those. So Chapter 6.04.310 of the Municipal Code relates to animal control. And it states it's unlawful to keep any of the following, including an animal which normally lives in a wild habitat, whether it's wild or domesticated at the time of its keeping. Furthermore, Chapter 6.04.330 states that someone who maintains or causes this animal to be kept needs to first obtain a permit. Please note, though, that there is no definition in the code of what an animal is, nor is there any specific reference to bees or beekeeping. Now, the 2009 Beekeeping Practices Administrative Policy is much more detailed. In fact, its goal is to supplement the Animal Control Chapter 6.04, which we just looked at, and it defines beekeeping as the maintenance of honeybee colonies in hives by humans. It goes on to explain that the purpose of the beekeeping permit requirement is to ensure that beekeeping on certain sized parcels in single-family residential zones will not be detrimental to the property, health, safety, and welfare of persons residing or working in the neighborhood of the proposed use. The entire policy is included in Attachment 1 as Attachment 1 of the staff report. So going on with the policy, there are 12 requirements listed in the administrative policy. And I'll generally say that requirements 1 through 3 and 8 through 12 relate to items such as how to submit the application to the Community Development Department, how to include site maps, plans, drawings, requirements related to inspections, signage, permit renewals, and even conditions for revocation of a permit. We're going to focus mostly on the requirements 4, 5, 6, and 7 listed here. Number 4 relates to the number of hives that can be kept. Per the San Carlos policy, residents can keep 1 bee colony or hive for every 10,000 square feet or more, and lists a 2 hive maximum. The next item, number 5, explains the distance the hives must be located from a property line or a neighbor's dwelling unit. So it states no hive should be placed within 10 feet of any side property line or within 50 feet of a neighbor's dwelling unit, Now, I want to point out that there seems to be an error in the posted policies. On our website, our policy lists that there is a 50 feet requirement, but the attachment and other documents out there list 30. But we can definitely clear this up after we come back with recommendations. So for now, please assume it's 30 or 50. Number 6 relates to the orientation of hives. This means that the hive entrance must face the house or building of the premises of the beekeeper. And it also goes on to state that the hive must be located in an area of property which is surrounded by a solid fence, not less than 6 feet in height. Finally is a water requirement. Number 7 says all properties must provide a constant water supply adequate to the needs of all hives located on the premises. Currently, the state of beekeeping permits in San Carlos is this. The Community Development Department's Building Code Division has confirmed that it has never received an application for a beekeeping permit. Also, the city's code enforcement officer has received 2 complaints related to beekeeping since 2012, and both of those were in 2014. This is a map I've taken from the Beekeepers Guild of San Mateo County's website, and it shows San Mateo County and all of its cities. And one thing that pops out immediately is that the cities of San Carlos and Redwood City and the town of Hillsborough are the only towns in the county or cities that still have beekeeping regulations. These other locations have no regulation or have some sort of a nuisance-based policy. So we've already reviewed where San Carlos stands. And in comparison, Redwood City allows 2 hives per 3,000 square feet. And it doesn't have any limit on the number of hives for parcels greater than 3,000 square feet. And Hillsborough allows a maximum of 3 hives per property. Back at the distance and location of hive requirement, Redwood City only requires that the hive be located 25 feet from any dwelling on an adjacent property. It doesn't mention anything about property lines. And the Hillsborough has a 50 feet from any street, dwelling, or place of public assemblage requirement. No one else mentions the orientation of the hives, and Redwood City also mentions the water provisioning requirement. This is the area I want to spend the most time, since it's what's prompted this conversation and study session this evening. In January of this year, I was copied on 29 emails that were intended for council, and I was copied on them. And they were from members of the public expressing their opinions and concerns that the city's beekeeping restrictions are overly restrictive and suggesting that we have more of a nuisance-based approach to beekeeping. Attachment 3 actually lists all of the individuals that had reached out to council to share their opinion. Furthermore, in attachment 4, there is a letter that I referred to quite a bit in the staff report. And it's an October 2021 letter to then Mayor Parmer Lohan from Bee Legal Coordinator Nikki Irvine. And in it, there's also a reference, which they include as Exhibit A, to a 2019-2020 petition, which was signed by 225 residents in support of a more bee-friendly policy in San Carlos. Also, on February 9th, this month, I met with the Bee Legal Coordinator, Nikki Irvine, and 2 residents to hear more about what their opinions are on these policies and restrictions and what we could do to change them. And so that's what I've come up with here, these 3 themes for you to consider. The first one is that the current restrictions are an effective ban on beekeeping. And what is meant by this is that our current policy that says that you must have at least 10,000 square feet in order to have 1 hive and a maximum of 2 is overly restrictive. In fact, of the approximately 8,000 lots that we have in the city that are zoned RS6, single family residential, 16% are 10,000 square feet or greater. And furthermore, folks find that the distance from the property lines and the distance from neighbors' dwellings requirements are also very onerous and restrictive. The second theme is that I've been hearing is that the current restrictions are not based on facts about bee behaviors, but they're actually based on fears. And this is what I've heard. One thing or bee behavior that's seen as a nuisance is swarming. And I'm going to read directly from the staff report on this one. I did some research and found some information from UC Davis's Department of Entomology and Clemson University's College of Agriculture. And I'm going to read directly from that on what swarming is. So swarming is the honeybee's method of colony reproduction. The old queen and half of the worker bees leave their former nest and seek a new home. The outpouring of bees from the hive forms a large buzzing cloud of insects that seems to be going in every direction at once. That flying group of honeybees is the swarm. The bees coalesce into a single group on an object. And the group properly is called a cluster, but most people still refer to it as a swarm. Also, swarms only stay in one place for a few hours or maybe a day, but some swarms may remain for several days. So when looking at bee behavior in swarms, one of the arguments I've heard from residents is that the restrictions in place don't do very much to control this phenomenon that's called swarming. But I did hear from the bee legal group and the San Mateo Beekeepers Guild that they do offer, as a nonprofit, they do offer free bee removal services for cities that follow the nuisance-based approach. So swarming is one type of behavior that, from what it sounds like, cannot be regulated or controlled. Another type of behavior that folks often are afraid of are stings. I don't know if you've been stung, but yeah, it hurts a lot. And one thing I heard is that there's a lot of misinformation about honeybees. And I was told that honeybees are often mistaken for yellow jackets, and that honeybees, while they are not aggressive, yellow jackets are aggressive. So I think there's a perception issue that's sort of floating around out there as well. And the final prevailing public opinion I've heard is that the benefits definitely outweigh the nuisances posed by honeybees. And I'll give you an example of some of the themes. And mostly I obtained this from the October letter that I referenced in the staff report. So here's what I've heard. I've heard bees play a critical role both in our environment and for agricultural production. I've heard that beekeeping counters the losses in honeybee populations, which are well documented and widely recognized by the public since colony collapse disorder, which is the phenomenon related to the declining bee population, honeybee population. And this third item that I was really surprised to hear, maintaining plants that depend on bee pollination is now recognized as an important management tool in response to increasing fire incidents due to climate change. Without knowledgeable efforts to maintain pollinators, local habitats will convert to wind-pollinated plants, which are more susceptible to future fire. As I mentioned at the outset, this is a study session, and what we're really looking for is Council's guidance and direction on how to proceed, if at all, with our current beekeeping regulations. I tried to think of how to present this in a way that would aid your discussion, and I think two questions need to be asked. The first question is, what are, in fact, the nuisances posed by beekeeping, and which of these do you feel should be regulated, if at all? And where do you stand on the spectrum of most restrictive to least restrictive approaches to regulating beekeeping. So to summarize some of the perceived nuisances posed by beekeeping, we discussed swarming, which is colony reproduction, and it's a temporary type of event. I talked about stings, and that honeybees are not considered aggressive, unlike yellow jackets and wasps. What I didn't talk about are flyway and water provisioning. When I met with the residents and the bee legal coordinator this month, and I asked, what are plausible nuisances posed by honeybees? Is there something that we should be looking out for? And I was told yes by Nikki Irvine. In fact, there's flyway and water provisioning. Flyway is the direction in which bees fly when they exit a hive. And she gave a really interesting example. She said, when you have one hive, which is the restriction, it's harder to control flyway. And one way to do it is to have some sort of lattice or fencing. It doesn't necessarily need to be solid. And in fact, one way to deal with the issue is to put another hive directly facing one hive, and you have two. And what happens is the bees come out and then they go directly up. And I wasn't so interested in, the details of that one particular solution, but what really, struck me is that there are a lot of different solutions depending on the yard, depending on the layout, depending on the individual. So I think one thing that I've heard is this desire to have some flexibility in the approach to beekeeping to address these issues as they arrive, and they seem to be different for different types of properties. And the next item that's a potential nuisance is water provisioning. And so I thought that one was interesting. I thought, what does this mean? And the bottom line is bees need a fresh water source. So if the beekeeper doesn't maintain a fresh, clean source that doesn't attract mosquitoes, hopefully, bees will search elsewhere. And if the neighbor has a swimming pool or some other sort of body of water or fountain, bees will gravitate toward that water. But if they do have something nearby, they will use the water source that's closest to their hives. So when thinking about nuisances, I ask that you consider at least these 4 topics. And I think flyway and water provisioning, based on what I've read and heard from the community and from the subject matter experts, is that flyway and water provisioning are really the ones to look out for. So when considering these nuisances, I also respectfully propose that you consider where you stand on the spectrum of regulations. On the left, I've listed most restrictive, which is our current policy. The bee is considered an animal per our code. We have our policy with its requirements and a $365 permit requirement. All of the other possibilities suggest maybe removing the permit requirement. Perhaps we don't. There's a lot of flexibility here. These were just things to get you started. I'm getting the sense from emails that came in today from the community that there's a gravitation toward the somewhat restrictive aspect of the regulations, which is having no permit, but defining specific regulations for the nuisances of flyway and water provisioning, which we just reviewed. We could also just be more vague and say, we'll just treat this as a general nuisance. I've heard that can tend to open up more disputes between neighbors that may have pre-existing issues between them. But I really wanted to open up the conversation to you all and be here to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Niall. And I want to thank you for all of your work meeting with members of the public and reading through all of the many emails that we have received and doing all of the research that you cited today. That was a very thorough presentation. So we will open it up to questions. I see Councilmember Palmer-Lohan and then Councilmember Dugan.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Niall, for your presentation and very thorough. And I appreciate the framework that you provided. Very helpful. So I did receive an email from a community member this weekend expressing concern in that her son is allergic to bees and was stung, and it was a very negative episode. And I can appreciate that. We have allergies in my family, and it can be, very frightening when that presents. I was just wondering, in those cases, I was thinking about, was there any consideration given to perhaps maybe having something on the books that just suggests or recommends that if somebody's going to start to keep bees, that they inform their neighbors within a certain radius? And if so, what might that look like as a way just to, again, be a good neighbor and have that conversation up front? Because I think what I'm hearing you say is that, to just open it up completely, we may end up with some uncivil discourse potentially between neighbors, which of course we don't want. So could you just comment on kind of the safety aspect, the very real safety aspect some community members have with respect to bee stings?
Certainly. As a mom of a 10-year-old, I've hosted many parties and been handed many EpiPens from worried parents. So this was actually first and foremost in my mind when I met with the 2 community members and the bee legal coordinator, and I brought up this exact issue. And, I said, so what about the case of the highly sensitive child next door? And they said, this is what I heard from the group. It just is inconsistent with the way bees work. If we give folks the flexibility to manage flyway, and apparently there are ways to make sure that the flyway is 8 feet, starts at 8 feet so that it's above the average person's height. And they have their water source. They're really just interested in procuring food and pollen and doing their thing. They're busy bees. That, through education and collaboration, perhaps with an organization like the Beekeepers Guild, that information dissemination is probably the best way to go about this, rather than informing your neighbors and adding that kind of requirement. I think that might be too onerous. And again, it kind of opens up that risk of, neighbors with already pre-existing issues, finding ways to add more issues. I'm not quite sure how to deal with the case of the highly sensitive child. I'm just not sure that more regulation is the way to do it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, we will move on to Councilmember Dugan and then Councilmember Collins.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Niall. Very, very thorough report. I learned a lot, and in fact, so thorough, I have no questions, but I did want to pause and just disclose that I do have a personal relationship with bees. My daughters and I maintain a pumpkin patch, and we're always very happy when the bees show up and do their pollination thing. And but despite this personal relationship, I don't think it'll affect any of my decision making around this particular agenda item. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
I appreciate that disclosure. Thank you for being above board, Don. Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Niall. Great presentation. Couple questions. Do we have any data from ER rooms around the county with respect to bee stings? Is that something that gets reported or could be, or is it readily available?
I'm not aware of anything like that.
Okay. Then the next question I had is, it may have been in that long piece that you were looking at or that we saw in the presentation, but this swarm area or cluster area, I realize that there are different terms that are used. When there is one, what's its typical radius? Is it 50 feet? Is it 200? Is it half a mile? What was there a response or some sort of report from the bee legal people about that?
I remember reading somewhere that the range is 3 to 5 miles. I know that there is a representative from Be Legal on the call in the meeting. It might be better if those types of questions were answered by her.
Okay.
I'm not sure how to answer that one either.
That's fair enough. Fair enough. And if we've got someone, a representative, I'd be happy to ask that question. So I guess my question is what do we say to people who have family members that are highly allergic to bee stings, or what would maybe that's another question for this representative that is on the call is, what is the response to the concerns from those people who have family members that are highly susceptible and allergic to bee stings? So maybe maybe we could get that person available and we could ask that question.
Certainly.
Okay.
I'll ask Crystal to help with that. But I think over and over again, what I heard is education. I heard that there is this organization that's available. They have, there are two pieces. There's the Beekeepers Guild of San Mateo County that was established in 1979. And then they have an offshoot called Be Legal, which started in 2013. And then they have a site, and also part of the Beekeepers Guild is the Site Evaluator Program, which started in 2015. And they will go out for free and speak to community members, whether it's the beekeeper or the person who's concerned, and sit with them and talk to them about what could be done to divert bees and the flyway away from their home and their property, and provide that kind of advice, which is pretty neat considering that you have a representative available to come out to you for free and answer your questions like that.
I just thought of one other thing. Again, our guest might be able to answer the question is, and that is if you are someone who has a family member that's susceptible to bee stings, what steps can they take to minimize their risk? And there are people who have swimming pools, and I understand that because they're a large source of water, that they can be very attractive to bees. So I guess the question then is, what can people who are really concerned about it do to minimize their risk and their family members' risk?
Always carry an EpiPen is what I've heard. And be prepared.
I understand. All right. Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's all I have for the moment.
Okay, Ron, I've duly noted your questions, and when the Beekeepers Guild gets on, we'll make sure to have some question time with her. Vice Mayor Rapp.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'm going to pre-announce, I may have to leave and come back because my computer charger is not working in any of the outlets. So I may need to go to a different spot and then come back to the meeting. Thank you now for the presentation. The only question I had is, and I don't think I heard this, so I was anywhere. Did we get any feedback from some of the, obviously a number we have that looked like, obviously from when you presented one of the most or, more restrictive policies in place in the county. Did we have any feedback in terms of complaints and what from some of the other communities, how that's gone since they've changed over?
I do remember in reading one of the documents from the Beekeepers Guild that since starting the Site Evaluator Program, they've received, and this program has dealt with cities that have switched over and the county, that they've received 4 calls since 2015, complaints related to beekeeping.
Okay. And then I guess to me, I saw the list of things that, having some restrictions or at least, requiring sort of the fly zone and the water source seems to me like at least, a reasonable sort of baseline on that, because I'm not sure otherwise if we don't have those provisions in place and some requirement, how do we, and I'm just wondering too, without a permit process in this, like, how do we know that what needs to happen to ensure a safe environment is actually happening? Right? And the only time we hear about it is if there is a complaint.
Right.
Right. Versus having something in place that says, okay, we want to have some water and flyway and sorry.
No worries.
Sorry. I have my AirPods. Can you hear me now?
Yes, definitely.
My AirPods decide, even though I don't have them on, that they want to be connected to my computer sometimes. So that was one of those times. So I apologize. So do we have, so to me, they just wanted to have some requirements around it, some verification to me.
Yeah, I think that's definitely doable. And I think it's better to be specific with things that are based on fact rather than having a broad nuisance-based approach that can open the door to any type of complaint.
Right. And again, I would say I'm not opposed to loosening the restrictions and to allow beekeeping in San Carlos. I think that seems the direction we should move in. And I'm just sort of kind of, as we go through this, kind of wrestling with what the right balance is. So,
understood.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that Adam, your question is very good, and Ron's questions are very good, and we have Nikki Irvine on the line, Crystal tells me, who could help answer some of these questions. So I too have questions, but I'm going to invite Nikki on to hopefully speak to Adam's question about permitting and Ron's questions about working with neighbors who could potentially have a highly sensitive child next door. So Crystal, are you able to allow Nikki in?
She is in. Nikki, you should be able to unmute. Oh, there you are.
Nikki, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thanks.
Perfect. If you could introduce yourself, and then if you'd like me to repeat the questions or have the council members repeat them, I'm happy to do that.
Great. My name, as you know, is Nikki Irvin, and I'm the coordinator of the San Mateo County Bee Legal, which was formed within the Beekeepers Guild of San Mateo County, which, as you know, has been around since 1979. So we have, I think, something like 400 different members in the county who are beekeepers. And so, and they have a wide variety of backgrounds. We have very informed and well-educated people, an education program, and so on. And the Bee Legal, we have specific people from different cities who help as we work on different campaigns. And we'd be pretty close to the end of our campaigns that started in 2013 if San Carlos changes their beekeeping regulation. So I'm happy to answer any questions. And I think it would be easier if you just asked each one and I'd be able to respond.
Okay. Councilmember Collins, did you want to start with your questions about highly sensitive children next door to beehives?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for joining us, Nikki. My question was, you know, what would you say to someone who has a family member that's highly sensitive and really allergic to bee stings? And how would you address their fears? That's probably my first question.
Okay, well, first, just to clarify the difference between allergies and other kinds of sensitivities, there is a very small number. I don't have the statistics with me right now, but it's quite low of the number of people who actually have allergies, where they would have a reaction not just at the bee sting site, but or the yellow jacket site or some other insect, because sometimes these allergies are actually to a different insect than to a bee. So there are, you know, the reaction at the actual site, and then there's a systemic reaction that requires an EpiPen, and that is, you know, a really dangerous reaction. So there are beekeepers who are allergic to bees and keep bees. So you can definitely learn how to be around bees without being stung by them or being afraid or fearful of getting that kind of systemic reaction. People who are indeed allergic to bees, there are a number of different things that can be done. One of them is just understand that if somebody has a beehive and they're controlling the flyway and controlling water sources so that so the bees from their hives are not going, well, it's not that they wouldn't be going at all to the neighbor's property. So the first thing I would tell somebody is that they should be careful about what they plant on their property. So they shouldn't plant anything that is food for bees. So they should plant other kinds of flowers. And that will work fine because the bees won't come to their property if they do that. The other thing is that there are feral bees in all of our cities. And so beekeepers are not the only ones who are the source of bees, but there are bees in trees and other sources of bees. So moving a hive is not going to stop bees from coming to your property. So people who have allergies really do need to keep an EpiPen. And the other thing that they do, and some of our beekeepers who are allergic have done this, is you can get treatments to sensitize you to bee stings so that you won't have a problem. So you should go to an allergist for that. And so let's see if there's any other things. Yeah, so we, you know, telling a beekeeper not to keep a bee there is not going to help a person who needs to keep an EpiPen with them at all times.
Well, you do it somewhat. I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish.
Or needs to, or could get it, or could get treatments for it. And then the other thing is that just like with just a regular sting, many people are allergic to yellow jackets, and they might be getting yellow jacket stings and allergies rather than bee stings.
Okay, thank you. I think you mostly answered my question about what can people do to reduce their risk. You mentioned not planting certain kinds of plants. Are there plants that they could plant that repel bees or that are not friendly to bees?
Yeah, well, any plant that is not attractive to bees, does not have nectar or pollen that they're going to take back to their hive, will work. And we ask people to plant for pollinators, and there are definitely all kinds of beautiful flowers that are not attractive to bees. So not all beautiful plants are attractive to bees. As a matter of fact, some of the more elaborate flowers, it can be exactly the same species, and if it's too elaborate, it won't attract the bees. They can't get to the nectar and the pollen. So you can definitely change your plantings so that you're not going to attract them. The other thing I would say is you're not likely to get a sting when a bee is going to a flower. I mean, unless you go and swat at it or attack it in some way, it is not interested in you. I mean, I can go up and touch it and it won't do anything. So that's the difference between a bee, which will respond if it's threatened, but it just doesn't 99% of the time. You have to really go after a bee for it to sting you.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Collins. Nikki, I wanted to ask you a follow-up question from Vice Mayor Rack, and I don't know if you heard his question earlier, but he was wondering about establishing a permit process through the city as a way of keeping track of beekeeper efforts and making sure that they are providing, an adequate flyway and water source, because his feedback was that if we don't have a permit process, we won't know who's keeping bees and if they're following the rules. Do you have a response to that or some insight?
I guess I'm finding that a bit confusing, that question. If we have the regulation that was proposed under the somewhat restrictive option, then people would be required to, provide water before they establish bees, so that the bees are oriented toward the water, just like they orient toward flowers.
Right. Yeah.
And then they would be required to, make sure that the bees are going into the air and then off to whatever flowers they want to, forage on.
Right.
So I'm not sure that I understand.
I can jump
Go
in.
ahead.
Sorry,
Go ahead,
I'm
Adam.
back.
Yeah.
I guess, Nikki, what I don't understand, right? So if we say we're going to require these things, how do and not have a permit, how do we verify that that is actually happening when the person is, I mean, it sounds to me like I could just go ahead and put in a beehive and not do those things and no one would ever know unless someone complains. So how do we understand?
We've had 2 complaints in San Carlos
But I think in San Carlos right now, we don't really have, I mean, it's very difficult to legally have bees in San Carlos right now, given the current restrictions. So if we open it up.
But there are beekeepers.
I understand that they're not operating in a way that's necessarily legal at this time, right? And I know we're not sort of pursuing that, but if we were to go, I guess my question is, if we were to go to the least restrictive that says, you need to have a water service in the flyway, how do we verify that has actually been done if we don't have a permit? That's what I want to understand. That's what I don't sort of see the connection if we don't have a permit. I want to open things up. I'm totally get that and I'm favorable to that, but that's what I'm struggling with.
Okay. Well, first I would say that I think the most effective way to make sure that's being done is, one, we train our beekeepers to do that. We have classes where we teach them that's what they do. We mentor new beekeepers so that they do those things. So 99% of beekeepers do those things. They want to keep the bees going up into the air so that they don't bother their own family or their, friends who come to visit. So it's something that beekeepers do in any case. If a beekeeper doesn't do that and there's a complaint, they're so rare. The complaints are very rare. So we've had 4 complaints in the entire county since we started the beekeeping site evaluator program. There have been 2 complaints in San Carlos since 2014. It was a similar situation in Burlingame. There had been 1 in 5.5 years, and it wasn't about beekeeping. It was a complaint about a neighbor. So we have often these complaints are not even, about those particular things. So in terms of permitting, I've noticed every single city that had a permit that changed it had never gotten anybody to file a permit. So I don't see how making permitting a requirement is going to verify anything, because people aren't getting the permits. So anyway, I think that the more effective way to do it is through this education, which we're already doing, and which beekeepers want to do in any case, because it's not just their neighbors who want that done properly. It's also the beekeepers who want that done properly. They have to live around the bees as well. So they want the bees to go straight up into the air. They want the bees to go to a water source that, is close to the hives and, and good for them. And they don't want them going anywhere else either. So I think that the education part is what would make that work.
Adam, does that help answer your question?
I think it does. I guess the question is, so as long as someone is going through sort of your education process, then it doesn't become an issue because they, are sort of learn how to do it properly. But I mean, assuming there's someone who may decide to just try it out on their own and not sort of be educated or have your facilitator come in or know about that, how do we sort of bridge that gap if that were the case?
That seems like a question more for staff. Okay. And I think we can take a proactive approach to regulating, which we've tried to do since 2009, and we haven't received a permit. I feel that what we often see or hear are complaints, and that is usually our first alert that something is off. And I think what would happen is somebody notices a lot of bees or sees a hive or hears activity, they don't like it, they call code enforcement. Code enforcement says, well, we do have some regulations related to flyway and water provisioning. I can go take a look. They'll go take a look and make sure that the flyway is adjusted, or it should be adjusted in a way that no longer is a nuisance to the neighbor. But that really falls on us and staff. And I think it's like a lot of the ordinances we have on our books, we don't really know about it. We can't proactively ensure that they're happening, but oftentimes, unfortunately, it's because of a complaint that we hear about it. And if there is a rule on the books, then we have the authority to go in and manage to it.
I just want to make clear what our service is. This beekeeping site evaluator program is not about swarming. It's actually a service that we offer to code enforcement. And we go directly to code enforcement. We say, if you have a problem, call us. And then we send somebody out. We look and we talk to both parties and we try to understand what the situation is. And then we make recommendations. And if we see that they haven't provisioned water, we tell them what to do so that they can provision the water and the bees will not go, where they shouldn't go. We can't guarantee that there aren't bees that will go to those water sources because there are feral bees, but we can guarantee that the bees from that hive won't. We can, definitely make changes to the flyways so that the bees don't cause any bother, flying low over an adjoining property. So we've solved every single one of those 4 complaints in 7 years. Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense to me. I appreciate the additional explanation, Nikki and Niall. So I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I have a couple of questions, but I think these might be for the city attorney. But Nikki, if you want to hang on and stay with us, we love having your input and insight too. But I'm going to start with the city manager for this question. The city attorney. Thank you. Hi, Greg.
Hi.
My question has to do with nuisance law. Mm-hmm. And I noticed in the examples in the packet of different cities, how they define nuisance. So Burlingame and Foster City say that private nuisance law is used as a recourse. So I'm wondering what private nuisance law is And then I noticed that Pacifica, their public nuisance conditions are worded in a way that keeping of bees shall be kept in a manner that does not disturb the peace. And San Mateo says no person shall manage bees under such conditions as to create a source of constant annoyance or discomfort to any person. So I do see kind of some gray area in how nuisance is defined and how that would play out in real life. So could you talk about nuisance law a little bit and educate us?
Sure. In California, the civil nuisance law is that Civil Code Section 3479. That's the cause of action that someone would have if their neighbor is creating a nuisance. It's an entirely private action, so the city isn't involved in those types of neighbor disputes. So that's not a city regulation. That's general state law. The code sections that you're citing from the cities that do attempt to regulate it, in San Carlos, we have a nuisance component to our animal ordinance. Is attempting to create a local code standard for describing all types of activities that could be a nuisance. With animals, like you can imagine, a lot of different things could be a nuisance. People not cleaning up after their pets and things of that nature, or having too many pets and attracting rodents and things of that nature could all be nuisances related to having animals on your property. And so that regulation would enable our office as the city attorney I'd have a choice. I could go, if it's pretty egregious, I could file a civil action myself as the city attorney to abate a nuisance that's a public nuisance that's affecting more than just one other person, typically affecting a neighborhood. And the other course would be a citation type of a course where I could say that the person's violating the municipal code and they can get a citation. That's typically charged as a misdemeanor, but it can be reduced to an infraction depending on how our code is written. Two different types of remedies, because the criminal is a little quicker. It amounts to a fine and a deterrent to be behaving a certain way. The civil action takes a lot longer. I might, in a pretty bad case, I might go in for an injunction early in the case, but a lot of times to get a final judgment that something is a nuisance and get orders from a court, it could take a year to get through the court system, and it's more expensive to the city, of course. So I think that those are the different avenues that how the city would enforce something. Now there's kind of shades of gray that Niall was talking about, is intervening before you get to that step to communicate to the public, well, this is what our rules are. Permitting can be something that is an opportunity at the beginning to inform people what the rules are, instead of they just get, order online a kit to start to have a beehive and not really knowing anything about how to, some of the standards that Bee Legal has that are, second nature to them might not be second nature to somebody who's thinking of doing that. It also creates another remedy that's not among the two that I was talking about. And that's if you have a permit and people don't follow the permit, you can revoke the permit. And that's a different way to create enforcement. So if somebody doesn't follow the rules, we could say, well, you didn't follow the rules, here's your warning, here's the process. And if they continue to not follow the rules, we can revoke the permit. And then from an enforcement standpoint, that sometimes makes enforcement a little simpler, because the citation would be not you're creating a nuisance or you didn't follow the rules. It's you don't have a permit. A lot easier to prove in court and through that citation process. Or a nuisance, what they call a nuisance per se, which just means a nuisance as a matter of law. You're violating the law, so what you're doing is a nuisance. If that makes sense.
Okay, so lots of avenues is what I'm taking away from that. Thank you, Greg. I'll circle back on that during the discussion period. Okay, are there any other further questions from my colleagues, or I'm going to open it up to public comment? Okay, I'm not. Okay, I see no hands raised, so we will now open public comment on beekeeping regulations. You may raise your hand via Zoom or call in. There's a 2-minute timeline. Crystal, is anyone in the waiting room?
Yes, we do have 3 at the moment. First up is Wolfer de Bruin. You should be able to unmute yourself. There you go.
Hello, I unmuted myself. Can you hear me all?
Yes, thank you.
Right. I am vehemently opposed to keeping bees within city limits. One of the benefits was meant by agriculture and plant diversity. I'd like to ask the question, where in San Carlos is that happening? The second point related to that is my son is anaphylactic to bee venom. He will die if he gets stung by a bee. I cannot explain to him how he cannot be afraid of an insect that has the potential to kill him. And if a neighbor decides to keep bees, like, should we then fill our pool with dirt and forever move inside? Because I cannot guarantee him that he doesn't get stung. He's already been stung a couple of times, and those have been very scary trips to the ER. And there is no way that we can tell him to stay calm and walk away from the bees, because he screams and flails in panic. And whether or not we want to do some sort of therapy with an allergist is a personal medical decision that cannot be imposed on us by anyone else. And about the permitting, if there is no permit, nobody will follow the rule. I mean, there is a driver license and still people get pulled over on the side of the road with no valid driver license. These things happen. And keeping bees interferes with the enjoyment of our property, and it creates a significant risk of injury to life of my son. So I'd like for you guys to consider that. The presentation we've seen about this is very one-sided, and the argument against people potentially dying from bee stings is not taken into account there at all, and it's a little disappointing. I wish that would have been taken into account a little bit more. Other than that, thank you for your time and listening to me and letting me rant for a bit.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you, Wolfer. Next up, we have Marika de Bruijn, and you'll be followed by Kathleen Gallagher.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, can. Thank you.
Should I start?
Yes, you may start. Thank you.
Our son Ayrton was stung by a bee swimming in our pool in 2018. He almost died. Paramedics at our home, Sequoia Emergency, critical care ambulance with 2 doctors aboard to Stanford's PICU. Approximately 5 to 7.5% of people will experience a severe allergic reaction to bees. In beekeepers, the risk rises to 32%. 3.3% will experience anaphylaxis from bees. In comparison, peanut allergy affects 1.1% of the general population. Every school in San Carlos my children attended asked for no nuts, and it's in the San Carlos School District Handbook. People are 5 to 7 times more allergic to bees than peanuts, and yet we protect our children in schools from nuts. San Carlos lot sizes are much smaller than Hillsborough and Redwood City. San Carlos lot sizes range from 5,000 to 10,000 square feet. The minimum lot size in Hillsborough is 1/2 acre, and Redwood City lots are double, if not triple, in San Carlos. San Carlos lots and home spacing provide little protection from hives in comparison to our neighboring cities. The potential beekeeper will wear protective clothing, move slowly, minimize lawnmowers and leaf blowers. The family next door will not have protective clothing, will not move slowly and calmly, and they will swat out of fear. Many neighbors of beekeepers are stung mowing lawns. Hives will also multiply because the hive will raise another queen and start a hive in a fruit tree. The family next door will have no control over multiplying hives. This is common, and I know because my mother was a beekeeper for a decade until she developed anaphylaxis to bee venom. As a family, we are very knowledgeable about the space needed to safely keep bees. How could I protect my child if the law allows neighbors to keep bees? My neighbor's bee hobby could kill my child. My child could never leave his house or play in his backyard without fear of hospitalization. What options or rights would my family have? As a mother, I am asking you to help protect my child because my neighbor's bee hobby could kill my child. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Marika.
Next up, we have Kathleen Gallagher, and you'll be followed by Casey Inman.
Thank you so much. Kathleen Gallagher, 1777 Elizabeth Street. I really wanted to thank the prior speakers. I did want to just simply point out that there oftentimes the honeybee is not an aggressive bee. A lot of people do confuse them with yellow jackets and wasps. These are very docile. They do not want to go after people. They simply are looking to pollinate. I have two sons. I would very much empathize with the folks, but I do want to highlight that 18 of 21 cities in San Mateo County have changed their regulations to nuisance and mitigation. And I think it's really important that we have policy in City of San Carlos that supports beekeeping, climate protection, et cetera. We really haven't talked about the benefits of beekeeping, which is it supports growth of trees, flowers, and plants. These are big things that the City of San Carlos has adopted as part of the Climate Action Plan. So I would ask that the City Council consider that we do the somewhat restrictive option. We do the education, and we catch up with other cities on this particular issue. And I would hope that we could do this by Earth Day, April 21st. We've only had 2 complaints in 7 years with these jurisdictions that have modified their policies. So I really ask you to support changing these really tough restrictions on beekeeping. And I thank you for your time on this. I know it's been a long night. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you. And looks like our last hand up is Casey Inman. You should be able to unmute.
Hi, thank you so much, City Council, for considering loosening these restrictions for San Carlos. I've seen multiple examples of feral bees living in trees, living in buildings. There's no regulating those. They go live there. They're wild animals. Beekeepers keep bees very safely. They understand there's a lot of education in the community. I would say that New York City has a health code that requires persons keeping non-aggressive honeybees in New York City for recreational commercial purposes to register them with the Department of Health. Certainly, New York City residents have significantly smaller properties than San Carlos. And so I would say if New York City can do it, that we can do it. Absolutely, there has to be safety around people who really have a problem with anaphylactic shock. Everybody should know that. Their neighbors should know that. People who keep bees are usually very careful about these kind of things. And if there's restrictions involved around nuisance that keep it safe, and people are responding like the Bee Legal, I think that will be sufficient so that people won't have, big conflicts between neighbors, which is obviously unhelpful. So thank you for considering, and good night.
Thank you, Casey.
Thank you, Casey. And we do have another hand up, Patty MM. You should be able to unmute.
Hello. Thank you for all the information. I have one question about the foraging range of bees, and then another question about how I've been reading that keeping hives isn't necessarily going to help native pollinators. So I was hoping there might be some comment about studies that are coming out showing the effect of that there's a conflict between hives and native pollinators. Also between, there's been a study that shows that bees can't get over tall buildings into their low courtyards, or if their courtyards have a natural manicured plants, they're not going to be able to forage there. So thank you. 3 questions.
Thanks, Patty.
Thanks.
Crystal, is there anyone else in the waiting room?
There are no further hands.
Okay. It is getting late. So first, I would like to take a motion to extend the meeting. And second, we'll see if we can get some answers to Patty's questions briefly. So is there a motion to extend the meeting tonight?
I make a motion to extend the meeting to 11 o'clock.
I'll second that.
Okay, Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Okay, Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Palmer Lohan?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Rack?
Yes.
And Mayor McDowell?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. As I mentioned, we still have one more item to tackle after this, and we still need to give some direction to Niall. So Nikki, if in 1 or 2 minutes, are you able to give a short answer to Patty's question about the foraging range of bees and how hives will not help native pollinators?
The foraging range of bees is up to 3 to 5 miles, but if they have good amounts of forage, they will go less. It depends on what's in flower. There have been different studies about the relationship between native bees and honeybees, and in some cases, they've found that plants are pollinated better by having both of them, and they get more pollination. I'd say that the important thing is that we look at the larger environment, where in San Carlos we do care about agriculture and plant diversity, and pollinators are important for that. So both native pollinators and honeybees provide the pollination that's needed for those kinds of plants, rather than wind-pollinated plants that are more susceptible to fire to continue. I can't tell you about bees going over tall buildings, but it doesn't seem like a situation that is happening here in San Carlos.
Thank you. That's all very helpful. I appreciate that, Nikki. Okay, so Niall, would you mind putting up the slide on where does the council stand on a spectrum of regulations? I think we need to give you direction on that. And I will open it up to council discussion now.
I'll get there in a, here we go.
Thank you. Perfect. I see Councilmember Dugan's hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate it. And yeah, I'll just say I certainly, there's two sides to this, as with about everything that comes before us. I'll just observe, bees are good. They are in a little bit of trouble. And what we're doing right now, I don't think is working. We've got a permitting program and no one has ever applied for the permit. So, what we're doing now is not working. Evidently, there are unpermitted hives in town. So I am supportive of not requiring this permit that no one gets, and having some reasonable regulation that can keep these hives in town in a way that hopefully deconflicts them with anyone who's particularly vulnerable. And I think the recommendations I see here all look very reasonable and all look like they would do good. And I think if owners of beehives do these things, I think it can be largely compatible. So I support that. And as far as between restrictive and somewhat restrictive, I think they're all worthy of consideration. Number of hives, I don't feel we need to put, you know, like a number of like 2 or 3. I mean, maybe just an upward bound of, you know, 7 or 8 or something to make sure no one goes crazy. But besides that, you know, if they make sense, I think we should do it. And my last comment would just be, you know, whatever we do, let's make sure we get some notice out to the community that we're doing it. You know, we certainly heard concerned citizens tonight, and you know, we got a lot of emails from a fairly organized bee lobby. So I'm not sure we've achieved public input or outreach yet, and just want to make sure we have a bit of that as we go into the final ordinance here. Thank you.
Okay, good points. Any other discussion from my colleagues? Can't see everybody else. We'll go to Vice Mayor Rack, and then Councilmember Palmer Lohan, and then Councilmember Collins.
I was actually hoping to let them go first, but okay. So I guess from my end, I would at least, I think it'd be good to move away from the most restrictive aspect, but I guess I've been kind of looking at this a little bit differently. And so I'm struggling a little bit the way this is structured, frankly, because part of the reason we have an effective ban is because of the lot size issue, right? It's not because you technically, right, you could have a 10,000 square foot lot, which there are very few in San Carlos or bigger, and you could have, you could keep bees and have a permit and everything else. But the way the ordinance is written, it is an effective ban because of the lot sizes. So I struggle with the permit piece when the argument is made that there's been no one applying for a permit. Well, because the number of people who could legally apply for a permit is probably so small that it makes sense that no one's applied for a permit. So I kind of struggle with that and not having some sort of regulation around it. So to me, that would be the first step would be to actually look at it from that approach versus going right to the nuisance side. So I'm struggling with that. I'm certainly happy to open it up to more beekeeping. I think it's a good thing. I'm just struggling with the best way to do that, given where we are now, to move to something. I certainly wouldn't want to do kind of a least restrictive. I would want to, at a minimum, do something somewhat restricted and maybe restrictive. So that's kind of where I am on it. And I'm just struggling with the changing the structure because I don't think we're looking at apples to apples.
Thank you, Adam. Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So nothing is ever simple, that's for sure. Always lots of things to consider about this. And I appreciate the family members who called in about their son. My son has an allergy, and I know how terribly scary that can be because he's had reactions to things. So I think what I'm seeing here is that it feels to me like this most restrictive current that we have on the books right now. It's kind of like, yes, that you can have them, but no, you can't. And I feel that what's missing from that are some of the good insights around the flyaway issues and water provisioning. And so what concerns me about what we currently have is that it doesn't take those things really into consideration. And if those are two aspects of this that could help us make sure that the non-feral bees are better behaved, then I would be in favor of that. I also appreciate Councilmember Dugan's comment with respect to, do we really have proper input from the broader community on this? And I appreciate the parents that called in suggesting that this it feels a little bit one-sided, and I appreciate that as well. So to that end, I'm still kind of wanting to find a path forward where if there's some way we could ask neighbors to have conversations with neighbors in advance of actually, putting in beehives, I feel like that might be helpful, because I feel like part of what this is about is, just having a reasoned conversation your neighbors to make sure that there's acceptance of it. And I don't know if that's a possibility or not, but you know, it's all about everyone taking personal accountability and working together as a community. And I don't know if there's a way to do that within the ordinance or not, but to me, that would be the ideal. So hopefully, Niall, this is helpful. I'm not sure, but I feel like if we can, you know, have a little bit out of column A and column B, that would be ideal.
Okay, thank you, Laura. We'll move on to Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I kind of agree with Laura there about column A and column B. I'm inclined, though, to keep the current situation. I'm not really swayed by the argument that, you know, this is an environmental thing and a climate thing. We've got 17 other cities in the county that don't have any regulations. So I'm not sure that our not having our not having a unrestrictive ordinance really changes that equation. I mean, there's plenty of other cities that don't have those restrictions. To me, I still like the permit aspect, but I think that, you know, we can talk about how many feet from the property line and that sort of thing to accommodate some smaller lots. But I really think that we need to have the regulations around, you know, the number of hives and orientation, particularly that water provisioning flyaway restrictions. I think those are important. So, I mean, if it were left up to me, I probably wouldn't change anything. But if you're going to change anything, add some of those elements, like Laura said, of column B. I'm not sure that it makes a whole lot of sense to make any major changes to what we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Collins. I'll weigh in. I appreciate everyone's comments and the discussion, and I'm glad that this was brought forward. And I do appreciate the amount of public comments that we received. I too am a mom who carries an EpiPen in my purse. So I certainly empathize with parents in that situation. I think that, you know, I agree with Laura when she said that our current restrictive ordinance doesn't address some of the problems, and so such as flyway and water source. So I think that we do have work to do. I also note that our climate mitigation and adaptation plan notes the importance of home gardens several times and speaks to having gardens, and we all know that we need these for gardens. And I'm a little struck by how many cities in our county have already passed you know, less restrictive ordinances, and I don't see, you know, why we can't get there too. I appreciate the draft language from that has been given to us. I think where I'm falling is more in the somewhat restrictive, but I would like to really hone in on the nuisance language of the ordinance. I'm especially thinking about the nuisance language from the city of San Mateo, which says, no person shall manage bees under such conditions as to create a source of constant annoyance or discomfort to any person. And I think that that language could come into play in the rare circumstance where there is a child next door who could be severely impacted, possibly by having bees. And I'm wondering, you know, if Greg could weigh in on that a little bit more, you know, when Niall, you take this back to staff to further refine it, you know, is there language that, you know, would enable people in the rare circumstances of having a child who's severely allergic to, you know, to call on that nuisance language? So I think, you know, I'm looking forward to further study on this. I think that we can improve it. And I also note that here in San Carlos, we do have land under county control that is unincorporated. And so basically in our city, we have two different sets of rules for residents of our city. And I think that that's not very fair. And I think that's confusing. So I think that if we could fall more in line with what the county does, that would be more fair for our residents. So that's my initial feedback. Niall, do you need any further feedback from us or guidance?
No, you've been wonderful. Thank you for hearing all sides. And I will do some more research actually to make it more even-sided. I do agree with that piece of it.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciated the comments from my colleagues tonight about having a little more community dialogue too. So I'll look forward to hearing how that's figured out. Thank you, Niall.
Thank you all.
Okay, that was a big discussion. Thank you all. I'm going to move us on now to new business. 9A, consideration of introducing an ordinance repealing San Carlos Municipal Code Chapter 8.27, disposable food serviceware, and adopting a new Chapter 8.27, disposable food serviceware, regulating the use of disposable food serviceware by food facilities to align with new state laws. And it looks like we have Adam Lokar here with us tonight. Hi, Adam.
Hi, everyone, good evening. Yes, I'm Adam Lokar, Management Analyst in the City Manager's Office. And I'm here today to give you a presentation on proposed amendments to the disposable food serviceware ordinance to align with new state laws. So next slide. Some background on this, the City Council had adopted the disposable food serviceware ordinance in October last year. The purpose of the ordinance is to reduce waste from single-use plastic foodware. And Council set the enforcement start date for that ordinance as October 1st of this year. 13 other jurisdictions have also adopted the same model ordinance. And recently the state took their own steps to reduce plastic food waste and passed new laws, AB 1276 and AB 1200, that place restrictions on foodware. And while the city ordinance is already well aligned with both these state laws, there are some discrepancies that do exist, and therefore there's some changes required to the ordinance so that it is consistent with these new regulations. Next slide. So under the first law, AB 1276, food facilities are no longer allowed to automatically give out single-use accessories. Customers have to request them. Additionally, accessories cannot be bundled together as shown in the picture here. And the law directs local governments to enforce the new requirements within their jurisdictions, but does not provide a specific implementation date. Next slide. The second law, AB 1200, it prohibits the sale of any plant-based food packaging that contains PFAS chemicals starting on January 1st, 2023. So this law applies to all food packaging, including foodware that's used to serve prepared food, but also pre-packaged food sold in supermarkets. Next slide, please. So there are 4 changes to the ordinance to align with the new state laws, and I'll go over those now. The first change relates to the distribution of accessories. Under the current ordinance, food facilities are allowed to offer single-use accessories to customers and distribute them upon acceptance by the customer. AB 1276 requires food facilities, they can only offer those single-use accessories only at drive-thrus and public airports. So therefore, staff are recommending that we change the ordinance so that accessories can only be offered in those specific settings. Next slide, please. For the second change, the current ordinance allows food facilities to distribute accessories using open containers at self-service areas. AB 1276, though, allows food facilities to have these self-service dispensers, but only if they can dispense one accessory at a time. So staff are recommending that the ordinance be amended to only allow for dispensers that dispense one accessory at a time. And then for the third change, the current ordinance does not reference refillable bulk condiment dispensers. And while AB 1276 explicitly allows for the use of these bulk dispensers. So staff are recommending that we change the ordinance to clarify that these bulk condiment dispensers are allowed. And then the final change to the ordinance is to align with AB 1200. The current ordinance states that foodware containers must be compostable and not contain PFAS. And as I mentioned earlier, AB 1200 prohibits the sale of all food packaging in the state from containing PFAS starting on January 1st, 2023. So we're recommending that we sunset the PFAS requirements in the ordinance on December 31st of this year, and then look to the state to enforce kind of this broad restriction on PFAS going forward. Next slide, please. So pending council's adoption, staff, we will continue to work with the county to do outreach to food facilities with these changes reflected ahead of the October 1st enforcement start date. And that concludes my presentation. I'm joined this evening by Chris Slafter from the County Office of Sustainability, and we can answer any questions you may have.
Great, thank you, Adam. I appreciate that, and welcome, Chris. I'll open it up to questions, and I see Councilmember Palmer Lohan.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Very clear. Just a couple of questions. So the bulk condiment, I noted that there wasn't anything in the picture with respect to receptacle for what you would use to transfer the bulk condiment to your plate. So is the ordinance silent on that, or the law silent on that, or what's the potential recommendation there?
So those would have to be compostable. So you can imagine, I'm sure we're all familiar with the little paper cups that you can.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Got it. Okay. All right. And then I thought I had read in the packet that it was even more restrictive with respect to the type of facility that could hand out packaging. Did I misunderstand that, or is it? Did I misread that?
So it's only further restriction on the accessories is the dispensers that it can only be dispensed one at a time, and then that you can only offer accessories at the drive-throughs and airports, not necessarily the specific facility that can distribute them.
Okay, all right, so that's what it was, airports and, okay, all right, thank you.
I will move on to Councilmember Collins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Adam, I just have one quick question. I think our ordinance was supposed to be beginning to be enforced as of October 1st, correct?
That's right.
All right, but in the second paragraph of the background of the staff report, it says that, I guess the governor's order says that it says authorize the enforcement agency to enforce these statutes by June 1st. And then it says it doesn't provide a specific implementation date. So I'm confused. Can you help me with that?
Yeah, we were as well. It's not very clearly written, but basically we have to be ready to enforce it, but that they don't say anywhere in the law on specifically when enforcement has to start and needs to be implemented. So we're okay, and I'll say many of the other jurisdictions of those 13 have joined us on that October 1st start date. So we're still good to move forward with the timeline that we had set up previously.
Fair enough. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Councilmember Collins. Councilmember Dugan.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for the presentation, Adam. That was helpful. My question, I think it's a quick one. It's just sort of a reality check. It's actually for our city manager, Jeff. I'm still the newest council member. I've been at this just a little bit over a year. I'm really struck by the percent of our city's staff and our time, effort, thinking that has to go into state mandates versus whatever else we think of as priorities. And here we have a case, we just enacted an ordinance in October in response to a state mandate. And now, not even 6 months later, we have to amend that thing because of 2 new state laws. And Jeff, I'm just wanted to get your perspective. I mean, is this par for the course? Is this just, this is just something I didn't expect. So I'm kind of surprised by this, but, are we seeing kind of an increase or an acceleration of these types of mandates that we have to respond to? Or, how would you explain that to me?
Well, I mean, the issues definitely evolve over time, so they change from one period of time to another. Economics can play a big role in what the state's focused on. But since the advent of term limits in California, we've seen, an increasing number of state representatives come out of local government, and it's not surprising that, there's a comfort level in Sacramento legislating statewide sort of at the local level. And, we've seen quite a bit of that. It was very extreme in the 90s and into the early 00s, when not only did the state pass mandates like this, but they also diverted your local property tax dollars to backfill their own state obligations. And the voters in California passed a measure to put an end to that so that the state couldn't balance its budget on the back of local government. So we have seen progress. Unfunded mandates are supposed to be funded by the state, but they're never fully funded. Some are never funded at all. So I guess the short answer is no, this is not at all new. And you could expect to see this in the future. And, as economic conditions and other issues rise in Sacramento, they might legislate on different subjects. But there's always some activity in every legislative session that would be akin to this.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that perspective. And I guess I'll just get used to it the way y'all already have. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you, John. I don't see any other hands raised, so I'll go ahead and open it up to public comment. So if you'd like to make a public comment on the disposable food serviceware, you can raise your hand or call in. Crystal, is anyone in the waiting room?
No, there are no hands for this item.
Okay, thank you, Crystal. Is there any further discussion from council on this item? Okay, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Madam Mayor, I'll move to introduce ordinance number
1579.
1579, an ordinance of the Council of the City of San Carlos repealing San Carlos Municipal Code Chapter 8.27, disposable food serviceware, and adopting a new Chapter 8.27, disposable food serviceware, regulating the use of disposable foodware or food serviceware by local or by food facilities to align with new state laws.
Second. Thank you, Councilmember Palmer-Lohan. Any further discussion on this item?
Madam Mayor, I'll only say to John, welcome to local government.
I'm still not used to the state mandates, John. So there you go.
Fair enough.
Okay, so we'll close the discussion. And Crystal, could you please call the roll?
Vice Mayor Rack?
Yes.
Councilmember Dugan?
Yes.
Councilmember Collins?
Yes.
Councilmember Palmer-Lohan?
Yes.
And Mayor McDowell?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we will now move on to item 10, agenda setting. Items discussed in this agenda setting section will be considered by the council for placing on a future agenda. No action will be taken on these items at this meeting. Does anyone have any suggestions for agenda setting? Okay, seeing none, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Stay well.
All right. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thanks.